Ladies and gentlemen, please stand as we invite Sonaika McKee to lead the singing of Grenada's national anthem. Please remain standing as we now invite Reverend Dr. Osbert James, minister and moderator of the Presbyterian Church in Grenada, to lead us in prayer and a moment of silence for persons negatively impacted by natural disasters. Reverend, please come forward.
Draw near to us, O God, and in the quiet of this moment, hear and receive our meditations, both spoken and silently whispered in the deep of our souls. As we confront the losses from Ivan, Emily, and Beryl, we confess our anxieties in the face of forces which we have no power or control over. We acknowledge our finiteness and the tenuous nature of our existence as people living in a small island state. Today we bring before you our collective sadnesses and griefs, anxieties and fears, some of them so terrible we cannot even bring them to our lips in prayer. But we trust that your understanding is at work before words begin and where they cannot be articulated. We bring confusion, uncertainty, and doubt about the meaning of life and about your purpose for our life. Yet we are not without hope and would rather light a candle than curse the darkness. And so we thank you for the spirit of resilience that you have given us and the tenacious obstinacy of will that makes us undaunted by the vagaries of nature despite the limited physical and monetary resources at our disposal. Although we have no control or power over the forces of nature, God, you have given us intelligence, wisdom, and ingenuity to create mechanisms, programs, and policies to mitigate the effects of hurricanes. Give all governments the resolve to enact and enforce policies that reduce our carbon footprint, as well as provide for adaptation and sustainable livelihood. We are grateful for the Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility and the immediacy of relief that it provides to participating governments and institutions in the aftermath of a natural disaster once a policy is triggered. Lord, we are grateful for this facility given that hurricanes are earlier in the season and have greater frequency and are far more potent. Finally, we pray that this evening's Resilience Dialogue and Time Capsule event will accomplish its objectives and provide fodder on which we would ruminate as we consider the lessons learned from Ivan as it continues, even today, to shape and inform the way we respond to disasters and mitigate risks. Now I invite you to pause for a moment of silence as we remember those whose lives were lost and those whose homes and livelihoods were destroyed by hurricanes Ivan, Emily, and Beryl. Let us join our remembrances with the eternal remembrance of God. With the passing of the years, human memory grows dim, but our fate is that lives forgotten and lost to us are not lost to Almighty God. Amen.
Thank you, Reverend James. Please be seated. Honorable Dennis Cornwall, Minister of Finance, other ministers with us here this afternoon, Mr. Timothy Antoine, Governor of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank and Chairman of CRIF SPC, Mr. Isaac Anthony, Chief Executive Officer, CRIF SPC, Mrs. Sandra Bailey, Deputy Chairperson, CRIF SPC, other members of the CRIF Board, Mr. Carvelet, Secretary to the Cabinet, Cabinet Office, Permanent Secretaries, and we will single out Ms. Carolyn McQuilkin, Permanent Secretary with responsibility for national security, home affairs, information, and disaster management, who we worked with very closely with P.S. McQuilkin and her team on the organization of this event today. Other permanent secretaries, heads of agencies, and let me specifically mention Dr. Terence Walters, National Disaster Coordinator, who we also worked closely with from the National Disaster Management Agency, senior government technocrats, other government officials, development partners from the World Bank, the European Union, Caribbean Development Bank, Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, World Food Programme, the United Nations, and the Organization of American States. Members of the CRIF team, including CRIF's Chief Operations Officer, Ms. Gillian Goulart, our Chief Risk Management Specialist, Mr. David Maslow, other members of the CRIF team, members of civil society, our youth and children among us, members of our academic community, our panelists, other special invited guests, key stakeholders, colleagues, and friends. This event is being televised live, so good afternoon to the many persons online viewing via UWITV from the region and further afield, including many of our current CRIF interns, current and previous interns, and scholarship winners. Ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome to you this afternoon to this Resilience Dialogue and Time Capsule event, hosted by CRIF and the Government of Grenada. History repeats itself. Hurricane Beryl, the Ivan story, 20 years later. This dialogue and time capsule event is part of the broader Ivan Plus 20 initiative, which is being implemented across the region, led by CRIF in collaboration with several organizations, including SEDIMA, the University of the West Indies, the OECS Secretariat, amongst others. The theme of Ivan 20, visioning, remembering the past, reflecting on the present, and visioning for the future, resilience, adaptation, and sustainability in Caribbean SIDS. It was launched in March in the Cayman Islands with the support of the government of the Cayman Islands, including the Premier. The first Resilience Dialogue was held in June in Jamaica. I am Elizabeth Emmanuel, and I am CRIF's lead consultant for its technical assistance and corporate communications manager team. My job today is quite simple, to lead us seamlessly through today's proceedings. But let me first introduce you a little more to Ivan Plus 20 and the sort of genesis of Ivan Plus 20. In about September of 2023, our CRIF board, at a board meeting in September of 2023, began to reflect on 2024, recognizing that it would be 20 years since Hurricane Ivan. And it was Hurricane Ivan that led to the establishment of CRIF in 2007, introducing parametric insurance to the region, making it a household name. It's now a common part of our development landscape, and it's commonplace to hear persons speak about disaster risk financing. That concept was something that we didn't really hear much about back in 2004. It was out of this meeting that we agreed that we would lead this initiative that would allow partners and interests in the comprehensive disaster risk management space to bring into greater focus the best practices and lessons learned around comprehensive disaster risk management in the region, to collectively agree on how the past CDRM landscape has shaped current Caribbean development, defining and adopting lessons learned and best practices, and creating a pathway from our past experiences to shape a resilient Caribbean. We thought Ivan Plus 20 would also create a space for improved dialogue around CDRM and DRF in the region, pulling together several regional organizations, agencies, and governments to share best practices and lessons learned. And importantly, at CRIF, we always think about the future, and we love youth and children. Ivan Plus 20 is also designed to bring together youth in the region to help them chart the future that they want collectively. Let us sit back and view a short video that highlights the key aspects of this initiative.
Presenting Ivan Plus 20, remembering the past, reflecting on the present, and visioning for the future. 20 years since Ivan. Resilience, adaptation, and sustainability in Caribbean small island developing states. The island is devastated, in many places beyond imagination and recognition. Buildings, houses, crops, and infrastructure have been either damaged or destroyed. Many lives have been lost. The psychological impact on people and communities is unimaginable. This picture was on repeat in September 2004, when Hurricane Ivan devastated Grenada and the Cayman Islands, resulting in economic losses which totaled close to 200% of their annual GDP. Another 7 countries in the Caribbean were also severely impacted. Regional losses for this natural disaster event totaled over US $6 billion. 2024 represents 20 years since Hurricane Ivan. It represents a time for us as a region to look back, reflect on the present, and vision for a more resilient and sustainable future for our people. Ivan Plus 20 presents the platform in which governments, regional organizations, academia, the private sector, development partners, civil society organizations, and importantly, you will come together to implement a range of activities to foster and scale up resilience and sustainability. Come join us and be a part of think tanks, time capsule events, a Caribbean Lessons Learned Day, a donor conference roundtable, Caribbean Resilience Dialogues, regional children's events on resilience, regional youth events, and a commemorative technical paper series. Let us work together to collectively create a region that is a best practice example for other islands and coastal states globally. Ivan Plus 20, Resilience, Adaptation, and Sustainability in Caribbean Small Island Developing States.
In my earlier salutation, it was remiss of me not to mention the acting president of the Caribbean Development Bank, Mr. Isaac Solomon. Thank you for being with us. As we proceed on our agenda, I will now call on Mr. Isaac Anthony, the CEO of CRIF, to bring remarks, followed by Permanent Secretary Ms. Carolyn McQuilkin to bring remarks on behalf of the Government of Jamaica. Mr. Anthony will bring remarks on behalf of CRIF. What did I say? And I have been so enjoying Grenada. And I'm not even Jamaican, so it's the eyesight. So Ms. McQuilkin, Permanent Secretary in the Government of Grenada, and one of the persons we have interacted with almost, every day last week, in the planning of this event. So following Mr. Anthony, we'll ask you to come on.
Thank you, and good afternoon to all. The protocol already established, let me at least recognize the Honorable Minister of Finance, Dennis Cornwall, and other ministers of government in attendance. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to today's very important event, which I hope you find very interesting. Who could have imagined that anything good would come out of Hurricane Ivan, which occurred in the year 2004? Ivan the Terrible. That devastating hurricane event, which impacted several countries in the region, wreaking havoc, particularly in two of our smaller countries, Grenada as well as the Cayman Islands. In fact, it was so severe that the damage and losses were put at 200% of gross domestic product. And in fact, the total losses for that hurricane event going through the Caribbean accounted for about $6 billion in losses. How could I forget the pictures coming out of Grenada with lives lost, homes destroyed, crops wiped out? And there was that particular picture that I remember so vividly, where yachts, a significant number of yachts, were reduced to a pile. Must have been in the harbor or Carenage, which again really made this permanent impression in my mind about what a hurricane can actually do. But those pictures of sheer devastation coming out of islands affected, in particular Grenada, was obviously too serious to ignore. It represented, in a sense, a wake-up call for the governments of the region, who at that point felt really exposed, recognizing that it was really important to put the financing arrangements in place. And right now, there's a lot of discussions about pre-financing disaster risk. It's also important to recognize that the governments came together and enlisted the support of the World Bank to establish some form of disaster risk financing mechanism. Now, let me say that when that decision was made, and that was a few months after Hurricane Ivan, the decision was not to establish an insurance company, but rather to set up a disaster risk financing mechanism. And so the World Bank set about this and decided, in consultation with the stakeholders, to establish an insurance facility that we have come to call CRIF, previously known as the Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility. CRIF opened its doors in the year 2007, just under 3 years after Ivan, offering parametric insurance to the governments of the region. It was established as a captive insurance company in the Cayman Islands. We started off with 16 member governments offering coverage for tropical cyclone and an earthquake. And of course, our key value proposition is to pay quickly. And that is why we have consistently made our payouts within 14 days of the event. Obviously, when countries are impacted by those major storms or whatever disaster it is, they require the resources immediately to set about the recovery and the rebuilding process. So it was important to introduce this disaster risk financing instrument based on parametric insurance to help the governments to mobilize the resources that they require quickly. So CRIF, when it was established, was in fact the world's first multi-country risk pool based on parametric insurance. And within a few years of its establishment, in the year 2014, CRIF was restructured into what we call a segregated portfolio company. And why did we do this? It was to be able to give us the ability to expand CRIF into other regions, but also to introduce additional products. In fact, because of this decision made by the CRIF board and supported by CARICOM at the time, we were able to expand into Central America. So today we are really the development insurer, not only for the Caribbean, but for Central America. In terms of our expansion, apart from Central America, where we currently have 4 countries, we have also other countries that have since joined in the Caribbean pool. We've also brought in the electric utilities, where we have 3 members, as well as the water utilities, as well as, and more recently, a tourism attraction. So our membership has actually grown from that original 16 to now 30. And we have a very impressive record on the product development side because we've been very aggressive. We started off with, as I indicated, tropical cyclone as well as excess rainfall. A tropical cyclone as well as earthquake. And we have since added on excess rainfall, a product called Coast, designed for the fishery sectors, electric utilities, water utilities. And you would be delighted, those from Grenada, to know that Grenada is the only country in the region that has all 6 products. The coverage is equally impressive. When we started operations in 2007, countries were transferring risk to the CRIF amounting to about $500 million. Today, and certainly for the last 3 years, we've seen that number grow to about over $1 billion. Today, it actually stands at $1.2 billion. And one of the very important innovations in CRIF is that we've taken the decision to develop our own models because we truly believe that we need to pay attention to the peculiarities of the region and not having to rely on models that really do not address the specific risk realities of the Caribbean, including Grenada. By having our own risk models, we ensure not only accuracy, but relevance. I'm pleased to say that from inception, we have been able to make 75 individual payouts totaling $358.5 million, of which $91 million alone was paid in this year. That is the current policy year. $91 million. And by the way, the policy year has not ended. Not that I'm hoping for any disaster. And what better proof of concept do we have than Grenada? Which, when you consider Grenada and the impact of Beryl, where all three policies of the government triggered a payout, tropical cyclone, excess rainfall, and the one for the fishery sector. Of course, Grenada, the government of Grenada also has earthquake, but again, earthquake would not be relevant here. And that the government of Grenada was able to receive the payout totaling $44 million. We've also introduced the welcome, Honorable Prime Minister. So we've also got Grenada also has products for electric utilities as well as water utilities. And in addition to the policies that triggered from the government, those policies also triggered payout. Grenada as a whole received payouts of $55 million, with the government of Grenada receiving the single largest individual payout by CRIF, that is in the history of CRIF, $42.4 million, or, and since we have the governor of the central bank here, I will say it in Eastern Caribbean dollars, $116.3 million. That's a lot of money under its tropical cyclone policy. Now, I must say that as a CEO of CRIF, I always have this privilege of being the one to call a prime minister or a minister of finance to give them the good news, even though they're dealing with a very depressed state. And I do recall when I called Minister Dickon Mitchell to inform him of the payout, I had to repeat it twice on his request, because he wanted to make sure that the dots were in the right place, and we are really talking about those types of resources coming to him. In fact, it is very instructive to note that all the payouts that we made to government of Grenada, to NAWASA, which also received $2.2 million, as well as the GRENLEC, which is the electric utilities, where that particular company received $9.3 million. But when CRIF was established, and because it was established largely based on the impact of Hurricane Ivan on that country, we've always said that Grenada is the face of CRIF. And now, with this more recent proof of concept, where you had not only receiving the largest single payout, but perhaps receiving the most payouts in one particular year, there is no question that Grenada will continue to remain the face of CRIF for a very long time to come. But 20 years since Ivan, it is appropriate to look back, take stock of the region's progress in building resilience, reflect on the lessons we have learned, those adopted and adapted, and what we need to do to prepare for the resilient and sustainable future that we all want. This, in a nutshell, as has been said before, is Ivan plus 20. Remembering the past, reflecting on the present, and visioning for the future. 20 years since Ivan. Resilience, adaptation, sustainability in Caribbean SIDS. Now, while Ivan plus 20 was actually conceptualized by CRIF, we have had several partners, including the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, CDMA, We also have CIMH, the Caribbean Institute of Meteorology and Hydrology, the University of the West Indies, and the governments of Cayman Islands, Grenada, and Jamaica, among others. But let me say that the success of CRIF should not go unnoticed. In fact, CRIF has really become synonymous with success, and I've really had the distinct honor of attending many events internationally, and they always speak with one voice. People laud CRIF for the success that it has become in a very short period of time. But it is important that we build on that success to do more for our members and the region that we serve. And the regions, reminding you, is the Caribbean and Central America. And why must we do that? Because the protection gap remains wide. And again, based on more recent figures coming out, we are seeing that out of the total financial losses for small island development states, only 5%, right, is actually covered by insurance. This is too small. We need to find a way of narrowing that gap. We also wish to recognize the support of the donor community and other development partners, including the World Bank, which has really played a very important role in the development and operationalization of CRIF, and has actually been very instrumental in supporting CRIF in terms of achieving or becoming the success that we are today. Of course, the work is not done, because with the increasing frequency and intensity of hydrometeorological events, and possibly with that protection gap widening even further, it is very important that we seek to work together to build on that success. We position ourselves and we profile ourselves as a development insurer because we're not a regular insurance company. CRIF was established for the benefit of its members. We operate akin to a mutual insurance company, and all profits that we make is actually plowed right back into CRIF for the benefits of our members. We are able to keep prices relatively low and affordable for our members, in addition to supporting our countries with technical assistance programs. So on the one hand, while we offer products, insurance products, on the other hand, we seek to enhance the development prospects of our member countries. We are recognized as a strategy for loss and damage by the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and a strategy for closing that protection gap. CRIF has emerged as a significant player in the conversation on climate finance and climate resilience, and not to mention the fact that countries are now seeing it as a strategy for helping to build financial resilience. But while we pay tribute to several organizations, including the donors and international development partners, we must also recognize the commitment of our member governments, without which we would not have been in existence. I mean, take, for example, Grenada. Grenada was the main reason why we set up CRIF. It was a member from inception. For 16 years, Grenada never received a payout and could easily have said, well, is this thing really working for us? But no, it stayed the course, to use the words of the Honorable Prime Minister when we met following Beryl, and it received the biggest payouts. So again, underscoring the value of what we do. Coming back to my original question, I think we can all agree that something really good came out of Hurricane Ivan. CRIF SBC was born and bred in the Caribbean, and we're obviously very proud of our accomplishments. In closing, let me say that as CEO, I would certainly like to extend, on behalf of myself as well as my board, a warm welcome to all of you. And of course, we would also like to obviously work with you in ensuring that we have a very productive period this afternoon. I think the discussion that we're having today is going to be very, very beneficial, and we certainly look forward to a most interesting dialogue as we seek to build on the successes of this entity that we call CRIF SPC. I thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, let us please acknowledge the presence of the Prime Minister of Grenada, the Honorable Dickon Mitchell. Welcome. I now invite remarks from the Government of Grenada, Ms. Carolyn McQuilkin. Please come forward.
Kindly allow me to adopt the protocol already established, but just to recognize our Honorable Prime Minister, Honorable Dickon Mitchell. And I would like to say a pleasant good afternoon to each and every one of you. It is indeed my pleasure and honor, on behalf of the Ministry of National Security, Home Affairs, Public Administration, Information, and Disaster Management, and by extension, the Government of Grenada, to welcome each of you to the IVAN Plus 20 Resilience Dialogue number 2. To our visiting guests, welcome to Spice Country. We stand here today, 20 years post-Hurricane Ivan and 3 months post-Hurricane Beryl. We as a nation have witnessed the devastating effects of these hurricanes and have united to rebuild our beautiful island. As we are fully aware, disasters can have a huge impact on the local economy, which can negatively affect the social fabric of a community. In addition, it has been noted that the frequency and intensity of disasters have increased significantly over the last 10 years. Consequently, it is important that the necessary structures, systems, and coordinating mechanisms are put in place to inform the effective management of disasters. Grenada has taken the necessary steps to implement contingency structures given the devastating impact of Hurricane Ivan. The Government of Grenada made a very wise decision to invest in the Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility, CRIF, and we have seen the tangible benefits of this decision. Today, at this event, we are at a critical junction to learn from our past as we forge ahead to build a stronger, resilient state. This dialogue and time capsule event provides an opportunity for experts and technocrats from across the region to share their experiences and expertise with the next generation. It also provides a platform to share ideas and promote innovative solutions from various cultural backgrounds across the region. Moreover, it presents an opportunity for a generation that has not experienced Hurricane Ivan to dialogue with experts and be exposed to information that only events like these can provide. To the members of the panel, I would like to encourage you to have free and open dialogue because, ultimately, the information that will be shared will benefit all of us as citizens of Grenada, as well as our regional counterparts. On behalf of Prime Minister Honorable Dickon Mitchell and the Government of Grenada, I would like to express sincere gratitude to CRIF and members of the Planning Committee for making this event a reality. In closing, I am proud to say that as Grenadians, we stand resolute, facing the future, the unknown, the inevitable, with hope and tenacity to enjoy the rest of the event.
We are at an agenda item that says September 7, 2004. We will now take a moment to look back at Hurricane Ivan. Today, we still remember Ivan, especially for those who suffered the ultimate loss, who suffered losses, and the ultimate loss, the loss of a loved one. Hurricane Beryl, earlier in July, followed a similar path and presented a stark reminder of Ivan. We will now go on to the main event, our resilience dialogue. So let me quickly introduce the concept of this resilience dialogue to you. The panel is chaired by Professor Michael Taylor, Professor of Climate Science, Dean of the Faculty of Science and Technology, Senior Lecturer and Professor at the University of the West Indies, Mona campus. He's a world-renowned expert in climate science who has been named among Apolitical's 100 most influential academics in government. He also was a coordinating lead author for the special report on 1.5 degrees produced by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. He's also the co-director of the Climate Studies Group, MONA, and he's also our moderator for Ivan Plus 20, not just today, but Ivan Plus 20 in Jamaica. Professor Taylor, please come forward. The panel is designed as a rotating panel, and it is divided into two parts. The first rotation will focus on Hurricane Ivan, impacts and stories, and how Ivan shaped the DRM landscape in the Caribbean. It would also look at the application of best practices and lessons learned from Ivan that were applied during Hurricane Beryl. I will now call on the panelists for this rotation to take their seats. First up, we have Mr. Timothy Antoine, Governor, Eastern Caribbean Central Bank and Chairman of CRIF SBC, Dr. Terence Walters, National Disaster Coordinator, National Disaster Management Agency Grenada, Mr. Crispin Doverne, Climate Change and Disaster Risk Management Coordinator, Organization of the Eastern Caribbean States Commission, Mr. Jeremy Collymore, International Advisor, Consultant, Disaster Risk Management and Resilience, and many of us know Jeremy as the former Executive Director of the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency. Now, we do have an empty chair, and at some point during the panel discussion, our moderator will invite persons to take that chair. All right, so Professor Taylor?
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It is so nice to see you here, and thank you that you have taken the time to join this conversation that we're going to have about Ivan plus 20. So here we are, talking about history repeats itself. And you have heard already through the many presentations just how much Beryl seems to be almost a repeat of Ivan. So Beryl, of course, began in September 2004, and it began as a tropical depression east of the Caribbean. It developed quickly into a hurricane, passed through battered Grenada, as we have heard, and went on to Jamaica and Cayman and do harm other parts of the region. That was significant. And then here we are, 20 years later, and it almost seems that we had Ivan again, except Beryl was earlier in the season, but it followed much the same path, very quickly developing, rapid intensification into a hurricane, battering Grenada, continuing on and brushing Jamaica and continuing on. It's very interesting that both Ivan and Beryl were deemed unprecedented at the time, and we're going to hear that word come out as I talk to this very formidable panel that we have here today. Gentlemen, welcome. It is so nice to have you. I want to begin actually by asking you, the truth is when we talk about natural disasters, one of the things we tend to do is talk about them at a community or government or country level. But natural disasters are personal things. They impact people. And so in truth, what I want to ask you, just to begin, is to share with us, this group here today, your Ivan story. What is it that you remember personally? No, not in your official capacities. We'll get to your official capacities soon. What is your Ivan story? The thing that you remember personally. I see Mr. Collymore over there looking like he's ready to start, so I'm going to ask him to lead us off.
Thank you very much. The Ivan experience for me demonstrated two things that refer to something we've always talked about, but something we are talking about more frequently now. The night before, I was in conversation with Sylvan.
This is the night before Ivan.
Before the impact.
Right.
I was in conversation with Sylvan McIntyre, who was the coordinator then. And he was very concerned about the facility, and I was speaking to him up to the time the roof blew off. Mm-hmm. And I felt his anxiety as the manager. And that drew something to my mind which I will speak to later in the continuity of government. The next morning, we landed here, and we were driving from the airport coming up the road. And I saw people walking, going straight like they're going to church, well dressed. And I said to the Grantley Watson, the director of the RSS at the time, "You sure there's a disaster here?" But it's only afterward afterwards, I realized people were just traumatized, just walking freely. The second experience, which I will share, is we went looking for the Prime Minister. Then, nobody could find him. So somebody said, well, you should go up that way. I think he spent it in the hills. And so we went, and there was a Prime Minister coming down by himself in a suit and a valise, the old valise. And that said two things to me about these events, which are not often taking place. Continuity of government. And if you're talking about this, we have to really talk about the protection of our leaders as a key first step. And that issue of the psychosocial dimensions of these impacts, I don't think it was fully appreciated until recently.
Okay. Very interesting. I do note in your first recollection, you talked with him until the roof blew off. Did you hear that? As he said that. But the very interesting thing you said about the second, certainly sometimes we don't recognize that our leaders are people too. And so they too are impacted just as much as everybody else in the country. Thank you for that recollection. Dr. Walters, maybe I ask you, what's your personal reflection, your Ivan story?
All right, thank you. And so it was, I had not experienced a hurricane before 2004.
You must have been a very young child. Look, your face looks so youthful.
All right, so I won't comment on that. But yes, I had not experienced a hurricane, and so we I mean, yes, we were preparing, we knew what was happening, but the integrity of the house that we were in, it was 10 of us. The integrity of the house, if I can, go back now and do this again, I will not be in that house.
Okay.
Now, we were in the house, and the wind started to blow, and then we saw, this end of the roof just lifting a bit, that end lifting a bit, and, we were moving from room to room, and then there was a very bright light. Really bright light. The whole roof was gone. Okay?
Right.
The whole roof was gone. And there I was now trying to protect everybody. Okay, my wife, my daughter, my sister, her children, my grandmother, right? Trying to protect everybody. And we just had one little bit of area ply above the bathroom that we had to shelter the first half of that hurricane. So that's what it was for me personally with Ivan. Okay?
Okay, the bright light for you was the recollection.
That bright light.
And I'm going to take you up on something you said, but as my next question. But let me hear the other recollection. Mr. Devon, where were you when Ivan, and what is your recollection?
Well, I was at home in St. Lucia, at work, and if I remember correctly. And I was already engaged in the climate change business, so to speak. So I was in regular contact with the Meteorological Services Department. And I remember calling my counterpart there and asking him, where's that hurricane headed? He said it's coming to St. Lucia.
Oh, he said it's to St. Lucia?
Headed to St. Lucia because he said based on the Coriolis forces, it's going to rotate to the northwest and it's going to hit St. Lucia. Then later in the day, he says, a little later, he says, no, it's going to hit Grenada. Now, Grenada had not been hit. I remember Grenada not having been hit by a major storm for decades. And in fact, I do recall some Grenadian friends of mine saying that God was a Grenadian, right? So, I said, oh my goodness, boy, it looked like, God is changing his citizenship kind of thing, right? and the next thing I remember is seeing the first images of the devastation. I'd never seen anything like this. So these are my two, immediate recollections.
All right, you two are picking up on something I'm going to follow up on, but let's hear, Mr. Antoine, your recollection.
So my story...
No, you need a mic. Do you have one?
Yeah, thanks.
We have to hear your story.
Greetings, everyone. My story is not as dramatic as Terry's or the other colleagues. I actually missed Ivan. I was in New York. My wife and I flew out on the Friday night for a wedding of the Accountant General in the Ministry of Finance. The wedding was on Sunday. Ivan hit on Tuesday. So here we were in New York. cannot communicate, did not know what was going on. Did not know the state of the country except the images on CNN. Did not know the state of the home of my parents and my siblings, and we certainly did not know the state of our own home because, of course, there was no communication. And so for me, for the first few days, for us, it was just not knowing and the anxiety of not knowing. And in a sense, I could understand what Prime Minister Mitchell felt and what the Grenadian people felt with Karakou after Beryl, not knowing. Not knowing. We had to reach out to family and friends in Barbados, the council in New York and DC, and eventually we pieced it together. And it was several days later, to cut a long story short, that I found out that the country was devastated. My family had some damaged roof, but was generally okay. And when later on, a few days later, somebody was able to walk up the road and check on our house, it turned out that our roof was intact. The house was 4 years old at the time. What that said for me was we were spared to serve. And when we took the flight back the following Jamaica, when the airport was reopened, we came back ready to serve. And I felt in a sense I was spared the trauma so that I could be fully available to the Grenadian people as Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Finance. And I recall the 18-hour days, starting at 7 in the morning, close to midnight for the first 3 months, flat out. And there were many times it was adrenaline because I would eat lunch like 4 or 5 in the evening. And you were just going. And then sometimes I would stop in the middle of the day and look out the window and remind myself, this is not a nightmare.
Right.
This is real. Grenada is destroyed, and we have a country to rebuild. And I would shake myself, look up, draw inspiration from the Almighty, and keep going.
And we're going to get to that rebuilding. But it was important to hear your stories because very often we think about disasters in very abstract ways. But disasters are really personal things. And it's personal, it's certainly very personal from the perspective of observation, people traumatized, all the way to worry when you are not here because of the lack of communication. I see I have been joined by somebody already in the open chair. Would you tell us who you are? And I'm betting you are coming to tell us your story.
Yes, thank you so much.
Please tell us who you are.
My name is Abigail Baca. I'm a Senior Disaster Risk Management Specialist at the World Bank, and very honored to be part of this panel.
Welcome. Nice to have you on the open chair. What is your story? I think you want to tell us.
My story is of a young engineer. I actually was just finishing my master's degree, studying structural engineering, and had this fascination with these types of disasters. In my mind, they revealed the vulnerability of our built environment, which drew me to the field of engineering. But what inspired me was that it revealed the strength of people. And so the story of Ivan drew me in because of its people and because of the opportunities.
Can I ask you where you were when it was drawing you in?
I was in California.
Oh, you were in California as Ivan was drawing you in, but you were following.
I'm a Texas native, and so the force of these storms was something that I had been following as a child, and I sympathize with every child who has to face this type of destruction in their home.
Okay, and so it meant something to you, even though you were not here. I don't think you had any relatives here, but you could relate.
It inspired my career path.
It inspired your entire
my career path. And when I joined the World Bank, we were reviewing projects. And in fact, there was a disaster vulnerability reduction project being implemented with the government of Grenada. And a school had recently been strengthened. And this school was one of the schools that withstood the forces of Ivan and helped inspire greater investment in vulnerability reduction going forward.
Okay, you're beginning to get to parts of where I want to go. I wanted, though, to pick up on something that both Dr. Walters and Sir Crispin, you don't mind if I call you Sir Crispin, said. The interesting thing that both of you said, I think Dr. Walters, you said, if I could go back to that house, it would not be the same. You know, and I think, Sir Crispin, you also were looking on that comparison, you know, with the time then. This particular resilience dialogue, part of the resilience dialogue, I'm calling from Ivan to Beryl, the lessons learned. One of the questions I want to ask anybody here on this panel is, before Ivan, in Grenada, your last major hurricane would have been Janet in 55 or Fiona. And you might have had Lenny, I think, so, Lenny, but not. And so the memory of a prior disaster was not there in the generation that was growing up at the time of Ivan. Post Ivan, though, for the burial, anybody, I would say, over 25 would have a memory of Ivan. What does the role of something like a collective consciousness of the prior disaster do with respect to preparedness? So let's start with the preparedness aspect. Because we're trying to learn the lessons from Ivan. Did the fact that you have an Ivan help prepare the country, the people? We're beginning to touch on it. There were structures at all. Was that collective consciousness at all relevant with respect to burial? Anybody? Thank you, Dr. Walters.
I would say yes. Okay. If we look on mainland, I'm just going to touch on the structures.
Yes.
We look on mainland Grenada, we have a much stronger structures. But we have to go back or look at Carriacou. Their major event was 1955. So with Ivan, they were not impacted as significantly as mainland. So the buildings were a lot older. And just after the event, burial, an engineer said to me that 60% of the damage, that we saw in Carriacou could have been avoided if the structures were built according to code.
Okay.
So yes, that we learned from it, and now after burial, post burial, right, we would go back to Carriacou, look at the structures, look at what occurred, and definitely going forward, we would see a difference.
Would you say that the structures on Grenada, though, had been strengthened based on Ivan, and so you think there might have been a role in playing and withstanding in burial?
Yeah, it would have been a different result. Based on what I'm seeing across the country, it would have been a different result.
And I think you were saying much the same thing about the shelter with the World Bank. Jeremy, Mr. Collymore.
Yes, I think the work of ARD, which the governor led on his PS in finance, really started a consciousness by governments in the Caribbean to look at disasters in a development context. I believe that somewhere along that line, that consciousness and connection of risk to development was lost until we had Irma and Maria. And so the connection of our development policies and plans to reflecting the risk of environment has escaped policy consideration. I don't know if it's a resource issue or it's an issue of demand and focus of priorities. And so the 2018-17 event of Maria reignited this conversation that started in Grenada, moving from sustainable development to resilience. And I'm really hoping that these two events do not escape the attention of our policymakers for rethinking the approach to development. I can say more on that, but I throw it out there for a conversation.
I think you're suggesting that the whole development context within which disasters began to be viewed changed somewhere around there. But let me not leave you yet, Mr. Collymore. I think you were the director of SEDIMA at the time. And so we're talking, yes, the consciousness helped with preparation, certainly coming to burial. But go back to Ivan a little bit. You were the director of SEDIMA. What about response? Let's zone in a little bit on response. how did you first of all respond to Ivan as the director of SEDIMA? And how do you think Ivan introduced any kind of new regime with respect to responding from the kind of entity, regional entity that you represent?
Right, so by that time we had about 10 years of experience
All right.
in dealing with some of these events. And that's why we were on the ground very early.
Okay.
After the impact. And we're able to give some guidance as to the strategic considerations in the short term with the humanitarian components.
Give me some of those guidance that you offered.
Yes.
We want everybody to understand.
Right.
You are a regional entity. You are on the ground. So the first thing is, as a regional entity, your job is to get in and be on the ground early. That's critical.
Right. And have that conversation first with the Prime Minister, because he had to get his team around him. And then he had to find a way of communicating to this country, which was very devastated.
Right. And did you meet him coming down the hill?
Yes, yes. There's a picture of in one newspapers of that, so it's in the record. But what was important was to understand the implications of sovereignty and how you outsource some of your places of first call. And I think the SEDIMA system provided an opportunity for demonstrating the value of the regional coordination mechanism.
Okay, you have to break this down first. No, I'm a mere scientist.
Yes.
Regional coordination mechanism.
Right. Well, after Hurricane Hugo, which impacted the Eastern Caribbean, following Gilbert, as you know, in Jamaica, which the Prime Minister considered to be a Hiroshima, there was a recognition that the individual country approach to dealing with this risk was no longer viable. And we need to have a collective mechanism which gave birth to the organization. And so we were able to harness the military services, some of the health personnel, etc., to provide that support. And one of the things I wanted to say is about the importance of controlling the space, the sovereign space.
Okay.
People were coming from Trinidad, St. Vincent, all over the place with materials of all kinds not known about. And one of the issues was people were concerned that these materials were coming, but they were not receiving. And there was a great unease based on the security issues. So we had to take a bold decision to halt emergency supplies dispatch until we can put in place the security infrastructure.
Okay.
Now that was a very high-risk decision. But what I think it did do was to minimize the potential social dislocation. And I think we have to think about how we deal with some of these hurricane relief issues and the sense that people are not feeling the government's responsiveness.
Okay, so you began actually to create a framework for how to respond to disasters. Crispin, you are a similar kind. You represent the OECS, disaster manager. Take me to Beryl now. So Beryl has struck. How do you respond? Do we build on some of those lessons, those kind of strategies and models that were created after Ivan?
Certainly. I think one of the things to bear in mind is the importance of taking that action at a regional level. And for example, the heads, looking at Ivan and looking at successive events, I think certainly within the OECS, the heads are work much more closely together and much more rapidly. In fact, sometimes they'll communicate on WhatsApp to get a quick decision, as opposed to having to try to convene somewhere. They will use what works as quickly as possible to be able to provide the necessary support to member states that have been affected. And of course, they also recognize the need to be in sync with with what is being done by SEDIMA, for example. Okay, and also to provide the necessary support, say when there is need to do a damage and loss assessment. For example, a representative from the OECS was on the regional team, together with ECLAC and other regional institutions that went in as early as possible to do the assessments. So, being able to be agile, being able to move quickly, I think is really critical.
So the agility again, the collaboration across member states within region, the communication again becomes very critical. And these all seem to be part of the pillar of response, regional response to disasters, and things that we have learned over the years coming after Ivan. Mr. Antoine, I don't want you to feel that I have forgotten you at all. It strikes me that I believe you had a very important role in the finance ministry at the time of Ivan. Am I correct?
Yeah, I was a PS in the Ministry of Finance.
Right. So you come home after New York and you see the devastation. Financing is going to be critical to the recovery effort. At that time, we had no CRIF, and I know you will help me with some of the things that we do after. What do you do as a finance minister? Well, you weren't the finance minister, but what do you do when you come and you see the devastation? I know you worked long hours. What were you working those long hours doing?
Well, you pray, and then you work hard, and you find your partners. and frankly, you know, when I look back with fondness, I say with fondness because you look back and you smile now. Those are tough days. The biggest thing for me, and Jeremy kind of, Colimo mentioned it, solidarity.
Solidarity.
Crispin as well. The way we came together as a region.
Mm-hmm.
Venezuela came and helped us clean up. Guyana helped. Barbados helped. All across the region, people gave out of their little means to help Grenada recover. And we are eternally grateful for all those who rallied around Grenada at the time. World Bank, Abby, we negotiated a project in 6 weeks. 6 weeks.
Post-Ivan.
Post-Ivan. Hurricane Ivan Emergency Recovery Project. And I remember saying to the World Bank, well, if we could do this in 6 weeks, why do we take 6 months? Right? But necessity was the mother of invention, and we got it done. But there's something that always stayed with me. 2 weeks after I got back from New York, I got a call. I'm in my office, at my desk. And I answer the phone, and it is Standard & Poor's, the credit rating agency. Mr. Antoine, how are you? How is Grenada? How are you personally? So I give the response, and then they said, we regret to inform you that we are going to downgrade Grenada.
Oh. And you prayed at this point.
And I remember putting the phone down and pausing for a moment and thinking, how callous, how cold, how cruel. My country, our country is flat on its back,
right,
destroyed. And the call I get is not to say how much money we're going to send to help you. It's to tell you we're downgraded. And in my head, I understood the decision, but in my heart, I felt it was cruel. And I did not know then, but that experience stayed with me. And that planted the seed for what we would come to call in 2014 a hurricane clause, which is essentially to say, when there's a disaster of a certain magnitude, there's a pause, a standstill on debt servicing for a period of time so that the country could use that liquidity to help recover and then resume debt servicing. And as fate would have it, that clause came into effect in 2014. Grenada pioneered it for the first time in the world. 2014, 2015. And here we are 10 years later. Grenada triggered that clause for the very first time after Hurricane Beryl. And so much advocacy has been done to get the international community to accept this clause. Barbados has now taken it a whole other level with its own restructuring. But it is now becoming entrenched. We had to fight for it, but it has been worth the fight. 4 lessons, quickly. 1, the absolute necessity for fiscal resilience.
Okay.
The rainy day always comes. The storms keep coming. And countries have to have some fiscal buffers to be able to withstand those shocks. For us in Grenada and the currency union, and frankly, SIDS, we need to have fiscal buffers. And so when Grenada introduced in 2015 the fiscal responsibility law, which was repealed and replaced with the fiscal resilience bill or law in last year, that was a far-reaching reform for having resilience fiscally.
Just to make sure we all know, when you're talking about this fiscal resilience, you mean our own resources.
Correct. So the state must have some set aside to be able to rally.
And that becomes your kind of a first level.
Correct.
Okay.
So those buffers are important. Secondly, the pause clause. Because what it does, it maximizes your liquidity so that you can begin your recovery. Fiscal resilience. Second, financial resilience. Here comes CRIF. That's the second layer. You need to have the capacity for risk transfer such that you have, as CRIF value proposition offers, a quick disbursing facility with flexibility. With flexibility. So that the state can use those resources as it sees fit.
So we're getting the agility and the flexibility
Correct.
in there.
Because what is our experience before CRIF? You call a donor conference, people make pledges, many of the pledges are never delivered, and those that are delivered take a very long time.
Sounds like the climate change agenda out there. But okay. Yes.
There you go. So we've learned that we have to have arrangements that work for us, and CRIF SPC works for us.
And we're talking about CRIF SPC being also almost a regional innovation.
Well, it is. It was, as the CEO said, the first multi-country catastrophic risk pool in the world.
Right.
And the legacy of CRIF, Professor, is that it has now inspired similar risk pools in Africa, in the Pacific, and in Southeast Asia.
All right, we're going to hear about that on the next panel. I'm going to allow them to talk about that. But what I think,
By the way, there are two others.
Oh, yes.
And I'll say them very quickly.
Right, sorry.
Fiscal resilience, financial resilience, climate resilience. They need to harden both our physical and digital infrastructure. Dr. Walters talked about the housing, but we have to talk about digital infrastructure. The challenge with communicating, when Jeremy also spoke about it. And then the final one, which you also mentioned, is psychosocial counseling. That is extremely important. It impacts everybody, including leaders. And we must have the capacity, and we must invest in the capacity.
Absolutely.
To deal with that. Because if you do that, you give yourself of recovering much faster. What is resilience? For me, simply, it is the capacity to withstand and absorb shocks and bounce forward. Not back, forward. That is the resilience for me.
Thank you so much for, and what I liked about what you said is that you're almost beginning to see, using Grenada as the example, is that you have to have these layers built into for the resilience. But you started by saying we have to take responsibility with our own resources. So we have to put in place those buffers, and then we now begin to take advantage of the other areas that you brought in. I also don't want the audience to miss what an innovation that debt clause was. In fact, you call it the pause clause, And I think we really owe those who fought for it a round of applause of gratitude. Because it is now that we see the value. My colleague on the open chair, I know you want to make one intervention, it seems, and then probably, I know I have somebody else in the audience who I want to bring up to the open chair. But go ahead. I think from the World Bank perspective.
What I'd like to mention is that this capacity to respond does not happen by accident.
Right.
There's preparedness. And so preparedness is this key element of all these layers of resilience that Mr. Antoine was mentioning.
Right.
And when he says 6 weeks is fast, yes, that was fast for the bank back then, but we knew we needed to do better. And so based on the inspiration of these experiences and needing to provide that type of quick liquidity is one of the reasons that the World Bank is so proud to have partnered in the creation of CRIF and other instruments that respond to that urgent need. So the professionals who have invested and developed all of their plans to respond don't have to think, do they have the money for that? Do they have the money to buy the gas for the generators? Because this money will flow faster and it will be there so that the countries are able to respond with their communities at the regional level, at the country level, and at the school level even. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, you heard it here, the World Bank, agile and responsive, very fast. I do know, and I'm going to thank you for being in the open chair, but I do know, I think we have in the audience Mr. Nick Granger, I think, from World Food Program. Is he here? No? Yes. And I want to bring him up because I want to ask him to join this open chair. I know I'm running out of time for this panel. Because something you said, talked about, even when you have all of these fiscal layers of protection, in the end, we have to get down to social protection. You know, it's where I started. Disasters are about people, you know, and you have all of this. So you have these flows coming in. What do we do? And I know the World Food Program has a little social protection element, maybe not a little, a big social protection I'm going to ask you to talk about. But before, Dr. Walters, just to give him a little chance to get settled and to think about it, you get the flows now. Where do we tackle? How do you go into communities? Where do we start? You know, and then in immediate recovery and then in building the resilience over time, you know, as the disaster coordinator. How do we get into communities now that if we have these layers and have the finance flowing?
So we need to ensure that we have structures put in place, all right, to deal with our communities or people. If you must have the structure before.
Tell me what those structures are, though. We hear these things, structures. What do you mean by structures?
Structures. So you set up your communities in such a way that they are able to take care of themselves using the resources that you provide for them.
Okay.
Okay? You set up your communities in
so things like you decentralize resources so that in the immediate post event you have the ability to access those resources.
That's right.
That's an immediate step, yes.
And empowering your people at the community level. Because if they're not empowered before the event, they would be just there waiting after the event. So they must be empowered. You must work with them. You must have exercises. You must ensure that people know what to do and what is available so that they can
So this is training, this is education, this is ensuring people know what is there and who to reach out to.
That's right. Okay. Yes? Yeah, that's the route we have to go to ensure that our people can be more resilient as we go forward.
All right. I know Sir Crispin is going to respond, but I do want to ask Mr. Nick about the WFP. I believe even with the CRIF element, there's an element where you come in and add something for social protection. Am I right? And what would that be? Tell us a little bit about that.
Test. Yes, so since 2021, actually, we have been partnering with CRIF and governments of the Caribbean by increasing the CRIF coverage in exchange for supporting national social protection programs. So
wait, don't rush over that so quickly. So CRIF gives a payout, you actually augment the payout?
Correct. So, for example, we would provide support about, say, $100,000 to increase the coverage, or what we call top up the coverage under the CRIF policies, whether it's the tropical cyclone policy or the excess rainfall policy. And all we ask is that the governments that we work with in the Caribbean is that they continue to strengthen their national social protection system. So continue to look at coordination between social protection and disaster management as they're the first on the ground, look at delivery mechanisms to deliver assistance to impacted vulnerable populations, and different payment modalities as well. But it's recognizing that, again, you can have risk financing in place, but you need to ensure that there are systems to deliver after a shock occurs. So what happens is, once the policy triggers, an agreed percentage of the payout is then transferred from the Ministry of Finance to the Social Protection Ministry to then be delivered to impacted vulnerable populations through the National Social Protection Program.
Okay, so you actually ensure that the ability is there for those social protection mechanisms. Sir Crispin, you look like you're about to tell me something. And then I'm going to ask if there's any one question from the audience. You can go to that mic as I have to wrap up this first panel.
For sure, there's a lot I want to talk about. Because when we're talking about social protection, one of the things I want to talk about associated with that is the movement of people who may be displaced. And in the case, or people who want to move, because it isn't always the rebuilding and response doesn't always happen at the governmental level. In the case of Grenada, for example, after Ivan, you had the utilities, the power companies from St. Lucia and other countries, member states, going to Grenada to assist the water and sewage companies and so on. But one of the things that also helped, you had individual tradesmen, and women moving from one country to another. Now, the OECS free movement arrangement between protocol member states allows people to move and work, have indefinite stay. Okay, so that greatly facilitates, and we saw that in the case of Dominica with Maria, how people were able to move. So and to assist in that response and rebuilding effort. So I think having that again agility and the fluidity to allow people to move, to get the skills and so on where you need them most. I think that is absolutely critical. Time is running out, so I will stop and let someone else speak.
Okay. I don't know if anybody. Yes, I see somebody going to the mic. Okay.
Tony Gibbs.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. We'll take a question. The Minister of Finance.
Yes.
Sir, before you go, I think somebody had gotten up before you, so I will allow the Minister of...
I gave him...
You will give him, okay. Tell us who you are and then ask your question.
I'm a West Indian who was born in Grenada.
You're a West Indian born in Grenada. All right.
I lived in 6 Caribbean islands, went to school in 4 of them, 10 schools before I went to university. I was a classical scholar before I studied engineering.
All right. And your question for...
My name is Tony Gibbs.
Thank you very much.
You asked Dr. Walters whether Grenada built back better after Ivan. And Dr. Walters said yes. I don't know how he knows that. I didn't do any survey. I can give you 2 examples of 2 very important buildings in Grenada which were not built back better. One housed 100 elderly people, Richmond Home. 30 of them died as a direct and indirect result of Ivan. So it was a big event, a very tragic event. The roof was replaced, and less than 12 months afterwards, Emily, a much less severe hurricane than Ivan, destroyed it. The second example is the Prime Minister's office. The Prime Minister's office was out of action for 3 months following Ivan. For one simple reason, the windows broke. The windows were replaced with exactly the same glass that broke during Ivan, because Ivan was the last hurricane that would ever impact on Grenada.
Okay, so he hasn't addressed a question to anybody, but I'm going to ask anybody to answer. And I think where he's going, if I take the essence of this, is that after each disaster, we have some lessons that we need to learn. And, even the challenge of Beryl this year, one of the unprecedented things about Beryl is that it was so early in the season. And therefore, you were forced to rebuild after, but even thinking that something else will come on later. So I think the question is, when it comes to things like, we talk about resilience, is there a role for making sure that we learn the lessons, including with respect to the infrastructure sector, and learn them quickly? I think that's the question. Anybody who may want to respond.
I want to probably frame a response to that in 2 elements. First, I will talk about the operational elements, which is speedy recovery to get things back up. And so that has been very evident in the post-impact reconstruction in the Caribbean. In fact, a lot of the hospitals have consistently lost their roofs from that kind of observation. So it says to me that the whole idea of standards and enforcement, especially for key facilities, need to be part of this policy.
And part of the policy when you are doing the speedy recovery. So speedy recovery must not be at the expense of the standards needed.
Exactly.
Because sometimes you're trying so quickly to get the society back up, but it must not be at the expense. I think that's what you are saying.
Yes, and then there is a related question of the disconnect between the science of the scientists like yourself and the social science. I think we are missing the interface of those 2 elements of science in informing policy. Because take, for example, the issue of social protection. For example, you have done some very nice models that can tell us about the performance and the characteristics of an event at a particular place. But what we often miss is what happens to the people at that place when these things happen.
Understand.
And so we need now to push our research in that direction to give a good sense of what can be anticipated and the financial requirements for meeting those.
All right. I have to take the Honorable Minister of Finance, and then we have to wrap this panel. I am so sorry. We could go on forever.
Okay, good evening or good afternoon. I'm not sure what the time is right now, but I just wanted to piggyback on something that the governor of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank said. Now, he mentioned the various facilities that we had to, as a government, pick up and run with. One of them was the suspension of the Fiscal Responsibility Act, which again, some quarters in Grenada, you would hear people say that the government has made a big mistake by suspending that. That allows us to basically mismanage and to go about spending like we are crazy. The other one I wanted to basically bring on board was the fact that having got in place those debt suspension clauses in our debt portfolio, we are now able to push back some of the payments that would have fallen due this period of time. We are now able to make those payments down the road. And again, in some quarters out there, you hear people saying that, oh, that's a bad decision by the government because we are basically just pushing back the debt down the road, kicking the can down the road. And then comes 3 years later, we have some 34 million. That's what they're saying, that we have to convert into principal. Now again, Governor, I think you would have basically saved the day for us in the sense that the government of Grenada has taken some prudent decisions in the last 3 months to make sure that we are guided by the best policies that you can find to make sure that we build back Grenada better. Just wanted to make that comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Gentlemen, we have to end the panel. I'll give you one sentence each. When you look on Ivan and look on Beryl, if you can find the one lesson that you think we have learned very well, what would that be? I don't know who wants to start. Nobody wants to start. Solidarity.
Coming together and helping each other out.
Thank you. Sir Crispin.
Well, one lesson I think is we should never be complacent. Anything can happen. Anytime, be prepared.
So preparedness.
And never forget.
The consciousness again. Yes. Dr. Walters.
Yeah, general preparedness and being able to provide the population with the information that's needed so that they can make the relevant decisions. That early warning system information, we need to, that's one of the things that I think we learned very well.
So ensure an educated population, and even when there is no disaster.
Thank you.
Recognizing the role of social protection in disasters. So a lot of people don't recognize that short response to social protection was used for Hurricane Ivan, and it's again being used for the response for Hurricane Beryl.
And Mr. Collymore.
Yes, the use of technology and helping to anticipate the response requirements. I think the drone technologies and those kind of tools give people a better sense of what they have to deal with.
Ladies and gentlemen, let us thank this panel. And thank you, gentlemen, for a good conversation. Thank you.
The next item on our agenda is simply titled Ivan 20. And at this time, I invite Cindy Celeste to come forward to perform this piece live. As she comes forward, Cindy Celeste, her work merges performance with power and purpose. She is a celebrated Barbadian spoken word poet and writer, renowned for her dynamic blend of Bajan language and Caribbean storytelling, intertwined with influences from R&B, soul, jazz, and hip-hop. At CRIF, we have engaged Cindy several times to write and perform various pieces for events that we host to showcase the work that we do, so not always being technical, but using the cultural and creative industries to showcase what we do, to showcase disaster risk financing and risk resilience. She has won numerous awards for her work. She recently completed her master's at the Capsule campus, and in her home country, Barbados, she is dubbed the Republic Poet after performing We Ain't Done at Barbados' Pride of Nationhood ceremony in 2021, celebrating the transition to a republic and the inauguration of its first president. Can we give Cindy a warm welcome?
It is time to do some mental math. Because if you take one hurricane and add 20 years to everything that it succeeded to subtract, the response should realistically have the equation looking a little bit different. It should be evident that we have taken the sum of what we have been given and managed to devise more than a mere handful of solutions. Have we kept asking ourselves this question? How well are we keeping score? Before 2004, I never knew I had a reason to fear this thing called hurricane season. I was only 8 years old the day that the world named Hurricane Ivan, but it only took a brush with the tendrils of Category 1 to shatter my illusion of the harmless storm, and my island, Barbados, was one of the lucky ones. Score, as in a number used to measure quality. See, at the time, I was too young to understand what it meant when the news reporter said, Hurricane Ivan has reached Category 3. But to this day, I still remember the images on my TV. Footage of flyovers from Grenada, dirty water and debris as far as the cameras could see. I couldn't fathom how the same storm that barely bent my neighbor's palm tree had stolen the homes of so many families, taken the livelihoods of an entire country. Ivan's flavor of fury swept through the spice aisle. And while I watched aid and rescue efforts, he kept building in intensity. A couple days more and he was Category 4, knocking on Jamaica's door. After all the damage he had already done, he somehow still had more in store, and I didn't need to know arithmetic very well to know that if 3 was already so catastrophic, 4 would do scarier things to top it. The same tendrils that barely tickled Barbados brushed Jamaica's south coast with more vim and vengeance, taking 17 lives with a mere cameo appearance. We in the region were in the midst of an uncertain circumstance. We weren't well equipped to survive, and by the time Ivan found his feet on land again in Cayman, he had peaked for a 3rd time at Category 5. And I could not imagine how by now, at such strengths, he would leave anyone alive. He took light and life alike, created storm surges 3, 4, 5 times my height, minute by minute, hour by hour. The infrastructural casualties multiplied, and even gave no reprieve the moment that he blinked his eye. But after he had hit and run, it still took months for Cayman to breathe. A relieved sigh. Here's an aside. There's something special about the things that are born out of tragedy, conceived in natural disaster and birthed out of necessity. That is why when the storm subsides and the winds die down, we lift our eyes to the skies for clarity, because we know that even after the tumult of a hurricane, we will somewhere find a rainbow's beauty. 3 years later, 4 years later, Criff was Ivan's rainbow baby. Born, conceived and born ready to lead, not just the first of its kind, but simply exemplary, rolling up its sleeves and showing our mettle, doing everything it took to make what it learned into risk insurance that was more accessible, to make every single member more capable, more resilient. Knowing that for each case it might look just a little bit different, we have learned that it takes a community to nurture an infant initiative into a regional movement, have made each government its own agent of change, armed agencies with the power to drive resilience forward, taken the aftermath of the region's worst hurricanes, and gain insight into how we build back stronger. Score. As in 20 years of honoring the promise to be the shining example for global best practice for small island states, resilience to risk, this is Ivan, plus 20. And I wonder what is in store for the next chapters of our story. I sincerely hope, that as the tides beat the rhythms of change onto our shores, the soundtrack that underscores is a chorus of countries working together to ensure a future that every single day is more resilient than the day before.
I would say no words needed. Can we give her another round of applause, please? We now invite our second panel, or second rotation, current reflections and preparing the region for the future, approaches and strategies for advancing sustainable resilience in the Caribbean. I will now invite the panelists forward, and also remind you that there is an open chair that you may feel free to join. The Honorable Dickon Mitchell, Prime Minister of Grenada, please come forward. Mr. Isaac Anthony, Chief Executive Officer, Criff SPC. Mr. Isaac Solomon, President, Acting Caribbean Development Bank. Mr. Felipe de la Mota, Team Leader for Regional Integration and Trade in the EU Delegation to Barbados, the Eastern Caribbean States, the OECS, and CARICOM CARIFORUM, and our lone female panelists, our youth advocate, co-founder of 195 in 365 Incorporated, youth advocate and representing youth for the Eastern and Southern Caribbean, here today, Miss Giovanna Hoshtialik.
Ladies and gentlemen, we want to thank the panelists who have agreed for this second very quick dialogue in our Ivan Plus 20 Resilience Dialogue. I have to tell you that if I was intimidated before, I'm even more intimidated now. All right? But we really, you know, for the last panel, we were kind of trying to say, let's look at Ivan coming up to Beryl. I think for this panel, we want to focus on Beryl and beyond. So we're talking about recovery and then resilience, because resilience goes way beyond the immediate recovery. But I want to start by asking you the same kind of question. disasters are always a personal thing. It's not something that's out there. And that goes even for prime ministers. So I'm going to ask you, what is your, since I'm talking about burial, what is your burial recollection? No, you may not even have to have been here to have that personal recollection. So, for those on the panels who might not have been here. But what is your personal recollection? I'm going to start with the lone female on the panel and then just go down the line, if you don't mind, gentlemen.
So, my recollection of burial was being with my family, my mom, my dad, my two sisters, and my cousin who had actually come down from the United States to see my sister graduate. He had come down, him, myself, 3 dogs and a cat, all squished in a single room with the windows and doors boarded up. Just listening to the howling sounds of the wind as it just passes through the cracks of your roof. I remember my youngest sister crying, worried about what's going to happen, and then afterwards looking outside and seeing the devastation. I was a teacher at the time, and so having to go back briefly to school to wrap up grades for my students, I remember wanting so desperately to go as quickly as I could up to Carriacou, and that experience of going up to Carriacou, laying on the top of the boat and getting absolutely soaked by the waves, and then looking up at Carriacou, which I visit yearly for the Maroon Festival, in complete disarray, was nothing short of heartbreaking. I couldn't imagine that the South was relatively fine, but the North and our 2 sister islands were broken and battered, and the people were scared. That's just my personal recollection.
So it's the emotions, the whole emotional connection, and especially not just for your own family, but for even others who you may not have known. I pass what about Mr. Solomon?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm going to cheat. I have to cheat because I have to tell you about Ivan.
Oh. All right, we'll take your Ivan recollection then.
I'll do both, actually, but fairly quickly. So actually, I happened to be, at the time of Ivan, in one of the world's largest service organizations, the Lions Club. I was the zone chairman, meaning that I was responsible for clubs in Grenada, Union Island, and St. Vincent. I was supposed to have a zone meeting here in Grenada the same month, like a week away from Ivan. And so I turned that zone meeting into a mission to provide relief after Ivan. But there's so many stars that lined up to make that possible. It had to be divine intervention. Because we chartered a plane, a Lear plane that time, to bring stuff in. We brought nurses, doctors, carpenters, just about everybody. And in the night, we were packing up the E.T. Joshua Airport with a lot of stuff that we got. And someone said, those things can't go on a plane. It's too much. Somebody just happened to turn up at the airport and said, there's a boat leaving for Grenada now. And so we had to pack everything back up onto vans, cars, everything, and head to the port. Got this stuff here in the morning and was able to arrive on the plane at the same time that the boat docked at the jetty. We were able to rebuild 2 plywood houses for some young Leos who were at the time sleeping under some culverts and coming out in the day. We built those houses in a day and went back to St. Vincent. So that was 2 weeks after Ivan, and there's one image that stuck in my mind.
Okay.
When we were driving through Tantine, there was total devastation. And there was one man sitting on a concrete step, clearly the only thing that remained from his dwelling, with who I presume to be his young son, sitting on the step with him with his hands under his chin. And for me, that summed up what it was in Grenada after Ivan. Fast forward to Beryl.
Aren't you going to be quick with it? You
Yes,
cheated,
yes, I'm going to be here quickly. Fast forward to Beryl. I was in here 2 weeks after Beryl again in a different capacity, clearly. In my role as acting president of the Caribbean Development Bank, we were proactively engaging with all of the leaders for the countries where whose part Beryl lie. We followed up right thereafter with coming into countries and providing assistance where we can. And I have to say that we were able to provide some relief to those countries with the help of some of our partners. And I want to single out the Inter-American Development Bank, who assisted us with providing some grant financing for all of the countries impacted.
Thank you very much. Honorable Prime Minister, again, I have to make the comment. I'm not sure, you must have been a little child during Ivan with the youthful look, but you tell me, which one do you want to share the memory from?
I think Dr. Walters was sitting in this seat as
yes,
well.
I think he was.
Yes, it has to be the seat. So good evening and thank you for having me on the panel. Like the acting president of the bank, I will cheat. Like governor of the central bank, I wasn't in Grenada for Hurricane Ivan. I was in Barbados. I had left Grenada the Sunday to attend the funeral the Monday.
Okay.
And I was on the phone with a friend when his roof went as well. I came back to Grenada on the Tuesday because I pulled a string with someone in Barbados who got me on an RSS flight. It's probably the first RSS flight which came to Grenada after Hurricane Ivan. It was myself and Sir Royston Hopkins, Lady Hopkins, one Grenadian police officer, the pilot, and 2 Barbadian RSS officers. We spent a prolonged period on the tarmac in Barbados because we could not communicate with anybody in Grenada. Eventually, a landline at the Grenville police station worked, and we were able to have whoever answered that phone convince the pilots they could fly into Grenada without being looted.
Okay.
Because by the Tuesday, it was clear that law and order had completely broken down.
Okay.
So when we flew over, my first impression, particularly at the north of the island, I thought a fire had actually burnt the entire country down because the forests had completely disappeared.
Right.
And the soil was so black that I actually thought we had a forest fire. The rest of it is history, and like the governor, I think I was spared to serve because I spent a large part of my time after that working with whether it's Rotary, Lions Club, anybody who was distributing aid. Fast forward to Beryl.
This is your cheat story, right?
Yes, that was my cheat story. Yes.
Okay. So
fast forward to Beryl, I think my recollections will be not sleeping. And then the meeting 2 senior female ladies in Hillsborough who'd lost everything in the immediate aftermath of Beryl. And there are pictures of me meeting them, and the pictures, I think, tells 1,000 words. So I will simply give those 2 as my recollection of Beryl.
Thank you very much, Mr. Isaac Anthony. But you can't cheat now. We have to give one story, one recollection.
Right. So I remember I was actually in St. Lucia at the time. And I do recall that when Beryl was actually approaching, there was a suggestion that there would be a hit on St. Lucia. And I kept saying to myself, is this going to be the very first hurricane that I will be physically in St. Lucia since Hurricane Allen in 1980? As it turned out, hurricane actually dipped and, of course, impacted Grenada and St. Vincent and so on. But the interesting thing is that just before Hurricane Beryl, we actually had our board meeting. It was on 26th of June. And if you know how CRIF operates, it's a very high-intensity organization. From February right down to the June board meeting, it's a lot. We do prepare for renewals. We engage with all our member countries. We do our reinsurance, placements, and then we have our broker here with us. And of course, preparation for the board meeting. And I was actually looking forward to what I thought was a well-deserved break after that June board meeting.
Okay.
But when Beryl struck, and I came to understand, the immensity of what had happened, particularly in Carriacou and Petit Martinique and St. Vincent, and of course what eventually happened in Jamaica, I realized there would be more sleepless nights.
Right.
And that's exactly how it turned out.
Right. And it's funny, that we were together in June. At that time, there was no indication of a Beryl at that point, having a resilience dialogue. And here we were a few weeks later. Mr. Delamoto, you tell us about your story.
It's actually very simple. I was in Barbados. I'm based in Barbados. But that night, I was booked on a plane to Brussels for a seminar on private sector development. And it was increasingly clear that Barbados maybe wasn't going to be hit as hard, but there was still a lot of uncertainty, to the point that I think my flight was the last one that was supposed to leave Barbados. But 2 hours before, I think we, together with my wife, we assessed the situation, decided there was no sense in leaving, of course. The risks were just too high. And so eventually I stayed in Barbados. We were lucky. It was a rough night, but it was actually, we were very, very spared compared to other countries. But ironically, that week was we were having the seminar for insurance for farmers and fisherfolk that we were organizing, the EU together with the OECS in Barbados, which we had to postpone. And we finally had it in first week of September, but it was ironic that that was exactly the type of event that we were trying to see how we can find options for insurance for farmers and others, but simple story.
Thank you very much. And we have somebody who has joined our open chair already from the beginning.
Yeah.
We know you are the broker, but you can tell us who you are and what's your story.
Yeah, I don't know if you can hear me. You can, yeah. So my name is Maja Popović-Birit, and I work for Gallagher Insurance Broker. And I thought it makes sense to perhaps tell you how it works from our point of view. So behind the curtain, if you like, when the hurricane is happening and when we are sitting in London and we are looking at the path and we realize that it's going to hit the countries where CRIF has interests, that's when we really drop everything and we look how can we assist. And I think it was mentioned before that you are the first on the scene to help with the finances. And this is where we are so proud to be your partner.
To be the partners.
To actually collect as quickly as we can. So we have a rule together with CRIF that actually within 10 days we need to collect the funds that are requested by CRIF. So we go really into all of our wheels are turning, making sure that we connect to all the reinsurance world, to everybody who is actually behind CRIF.
Behind the
and
CRIF.
Collect as quickly as we can. And we make sure that that funds is then sent to CRIF. So our experience is as soon, even before CRIF tells us that there is a loss that we need to collect, we already start working on that.
So even as far away as Europe, just the thought of the idea that there's a hurricane,
exactly. So
the action begins already.
So I thought it's good to kind of share that you have friends far away.
Far away.
And whilst you all have your personal stories, we are also involved and we are there to actually do our best to help as much as we can.
You're involved in the stories. Right. And as I've said, disasters are personal. And what we're hearing is personal, not just even in the region, but even as far as international. But I think, the place to start in looking on recovery to resilience. So we're looking on Beryl and beyond. I think I have to start with our Honorable Prime Minister. I think everybody out there wants to know just the status of the recovery. Where are we? Where is Grenada with the recovery? I wonder if you could share a little bit about where the recovery effort is. What is your approach to recovery? And just exactly where the country is.
Thank you. Well, I think, it's both relief and recovery still. And we need to appreciate that. But I want to make a more fundamental point, so I'm going to use some Prime Minister discretion and say this. We need to appreciate that nation states, small island developing states, are very fragile.
Yes.
And that natural disasters have the capacity to actually make the nation state collapse. This is not just about physical infrastructure. And if we pay attention to Ivan, Grenada actually collapsed in the immediate aftermath of Hurricane Ivan. And I say this because when I entered with the RSS, even as a 27-year-old, I think at the time,
one would never believe it. But
it was clear to me that you could have actually taken over the country if you wanted to.
Right.
There was no one at the airport. There was no one at the port. The prison had collapsed. All of the prisoners had left the prisons. The commissioner of police was then quoted as saying police officers are human too, which meant don't expect them to be police officers because they've lost their homes, etc., etc. So I'm saying this to say the entire small nation state can crumble quite easily with the scale and magnitude of the natural disasters that we face. And I will make this point. We were extremely lucky that the hurricane spared mainland Grenada for the most part. If its size had allowed it to sit over Grenada and Carriacou and Petit Martinique, we would not be here today. So I want to make that point. So when we talk about recovery and relief and words like building back better, I think we need to make sure that we are not, we're scratching the surface. There's fundamental issues we need to be able to come to terms with here. But to answer the immediate question, relief-wise, we are still in relief stage because you have large pockets of persons who've lost their livelihoods and whose livelihoods will not come back easily. And we can talk about farmers, for example, and the fisher folk, because many of our farmers depend on medium to long-term crops to survive. And so we are in the process of essentially giving income support, and it's likely we're going to have to maintain income support for a sustained period of time for persons who are in that position. From a recovery point of view, and I'm just giving snapshots of areas. For example, in Carriacou and Petit Martinique, we've been able to resume schools in a very short period of time. So it meant that students were only out of school for the month of September, which is a remarkable achievement because it helps to also address the psychosocial challenges that you would otherwise face if children are out of school for a long period, both on children and on parents. We have done incredibly well with the cleanup campaign, particularly in Carriacou and Petit Martinique. And if you understand the level of debris and the magnitude of the destruction, not just to the built environment, but to the marine and the physical environment as well, it's mind-boggling. But if you go there, you may not, in some instances, realize that we had a Category 4 hurricane. And bearing in mind that you're dealing with small islands that do not have any major infrastructure to bring or take stuff off the island, I think the cleanup, both on land and the marine environment, is proceeding very well. We are going to have major challenges, and we have to be able to accept that in addressing housing, and it is going to require us to take a long-term view and to make hard decisions. And Mr. Gibbs probably didn't say a lot about himself, but he can tell you about his efforts probably made since 2004 to address construction and the quality of construction in Grenada, Carriacou, and Petit Martinique, and the challenges we face still there. We have to look at how we can use modern building technologies and techniques that can really put us in a position where we don't find ourselves having the level of catastrophic damage that we faced in Carriacou and Petit Martinique. We are going to have to harden our infrastructure. Let's take the grid. The entire grid snapped. In some cases, it was in fact poor construction in terms of the poles and so on, but in any event, almost 100% of the transmission and distribution grid was destroyed. And so we're going to have to ask questions, and the power companies hard at work as to how do we put some of the main feeders on the ground to ensure that we don't relive this experience year in, year out. Communications was a major disaster. Both providers disappeared. So again, how do we harden the communication? How do we, as a region, because this can't be done Grenada only, looked at things like satellite communication to be able to give us the connectivity, because it's Starlink that first allowed us to get an inkling as to what was happening in Carriacou and PT Martinique. So when we talk about, in a sense, the resilience and the recovery, I think we face two challenges. If rain is wetting someone, he isn't interested in building code and building back better. He's interested in preventing the rain from wetting him.
Just putting a structure
Just
over.
putting a structure on his roof. The challenge with that is the temporary tends to become permanent very quickly.
Exactly.
So it will require us to, while in a sense addressing the immediate temporary needs to at least give people some comfort, it will require us to really stiffen our back, speak the truth to our citizens, educate them, and insist that we do what is necessary to improve the resilience of at least our built environment. That includes our infrastructure, or bridges, or roads, or major government institutions, housing, education, etc. And then on the softer side, I would say this: we've certainly learned a lot of lessons from Ivan in terms of our preparedness. But in an absolute sense, our preparedness is still woefully inadequate.
Okay.
And we have to spend, I think, a lot more resources, a lot more training in making sure our citizens take the preparation during our hurricane season a lot more seriously.
Right.
And that we have the kind of drills and, I would say, decentralization of resources that is required. And someone said it earlier, technology can certainly help us in doing that as well.
Honorable Prime Minister, I think you're touching on a number of the elements there, and I like especially that you touched on the education and training of the citizens. I know, Mr. Delamotta, you may have to run. I want to ask you to just address something. The Honorable Prime Minister, actually, a couple of weeks ago in addressing the UN General Assembly, one of the things he spoke about was the value of partnerships. And how in the kind of context we are as small islands, partnerships are critical. I want you to elaborate on that, but from your perspective, telling us a little bit about your role. I do understand that you will have to leave us after.
I appreciate that. I think it just shows how badly I plan my flights yet again, because I have one to catch now, so thank you. I will address that, but I mean, of all the quotes I think one could choose, I'm going to go with one from Mike Tyson at this point, which is, everybody has a plan until I punch them in the face. And I think it reflects very well the way one has to, because we're talking now about post-Beryl, but the sad reality is that we need to prepare for the next one, which we don't know when it comes. So that plan, that punch in the face, is no excuse not to have a plan. And that plan has to be built on these partnerships that the Prime Minister is referring to. And the European Union is absolutely part of that partnership together with other international partners. And in that sense, there's several layers to it. There's maybe the quick response, the humanitarian layer as EU, but also as the member states of the EU. But looking more ahead, it's the way we, for example, after Ivan, indeed went in strong as well to support the creation of CRIF, which we see as a fundamental pillar of the response to these events in the region. And maybe just to give some examples as well, in the case of the recovery efforts for the partnership we want to build with Grenada and the recovery efforts with Carriacou and Petit Martinique, we're looking at several avenues on which to build back better. Indeed, looking at, for example, the energy grid and how maybe to build that in a more sustainable manner so that it resists future shocks and is built on renewable energy basis, or even on looking at the water distribution by financing a desalination plant. But all in all, there is no way to do this without partnerships. CRIF would not exist without these partnerships. And on a broader picture, even at the bigger level of climate finance that the Prime Minister was also alluding to, the EU is a staunch ally of the SIDS in this regard when it comes to climate finance and how to approach this cause of hurricanes. But the sad reality is that we're living within it and we need to plan ahead, and this is all part of it. So thank you again for giving me the word right after the Prime Minister, but I actually do apologize for having to leave earlier.
We do understand, and we'll give you a round of applause for just coming and giving us your few words. Mr. Anthony, let me pick up with you. So the Prime Minister, basically said they are in the relief mode, We heard on the previous panel that CRIF had a significant payout, which I think to Grenada. I want you to elaborate a little bit more about that payout. And are there, for example, stipulations on that payout, or does CRIF allow the government simply to use it for whatever they wish? How does that work? Just for the people out there who are listening. Well, Mr. Prime, let me allow Mr. If you don't mind, Mr. Anthony. Yes, CRIF, tell us a little bit about that. And then I'll come to you, Prime Minister, and you will tell us.
Yeah. We're obviously happy, to come to the assistance of the government of Grenada, where we were able to make payouts on all the policies, all the relevant policies held by the government at the time. So on the tropical cyclone, they got a 42.4 million. Even the excess rainfall policy triggered. And there's a policy for the fishery sector that we call COAST. Even that triggered a payout. But in addition, remember there were two other entities in the country, the water utilities as well as the electric utilities. They all received payouts. Now, to your specific questions, we do not prescribe to the governments how the funds should be used. The governments typically have the flexibility to determine how best to deploy the resources. Because the reality is that they're on the ground, they know the situation, they know who is most impacted and how best resources should be deployed. Having said that, I can tell you there have been some concerns about, how efficiently resources are being used, and questions around reporting and so on. And again, one of the things that we've agreed, and it's all part of the participation agreement that the country signed with CRIF, is that they're supposed to provide a report 6 months after the event, detailing how the payout was actually used. But we certainly do not prescribe exactly how it should be done.
But you feel that that sense of accountability is important?
Absolutely.
From CRIF's perspective, how do you see the payout that you offer? For example, people may say, but that's a lot of money, that should be able to put in place long-term resilience plans. Or do you see it as immediate relief, kind of disaster response financing? Just trying to see from the CRIF perspective.
Right. So when CRIF was designed in terms of as a facility, I think the idea was really to target more the recovery phase.
The recovery phase.
Not in terms of the long-term reconstruction. Because the reality is that the payouts that CRIF make, as you know, is relatively small compared to the overwhelming cost of rebuilding. And I remember Minister Cornwall making the statement when I met that it may appear big, but it's still a drop in the bucket.
It's still a drop in the bucket.
When compared to the actual cost of recovery. But where we see CRIF in terms of the product that we provide is in terms of the key value proposition. The fact that we are able to pay quickly. We pay within 14 days. And once the government has access to those resources, it gives them the ability to really support the recovery process and make it as efficient as possible. So there are some things that are considered to be of immediate needs, like providing food, water, shelter, medicine, clearing up roads, rivers, things of that nature. Of course, there have been governments that decided to use some of it for long-term reconstruction. And for me, one of the best examples would have been the government of Turks and Caicos following Hurricane Irma in 2017, where they actually decided to use their payout, to fix or to rebuild a number of the schools on the island. So you do have that flexibility. There's nothing that precludes you from actually applying it for that long-term purpose.
Okay, and Honorable Prime Minister, I think you wanted to make a comment, and I'm putting Mr. Solomon on notice. I want you to address, in the scheme of things, clearly what CRIF offers is one kind of financing in terms of resilience financing, post-recovery. But there must be other things that I think the bank would be, and I want you to speak to them, but after the Honorable Prime Minister.
I want to ensure that we don't leave the room without appreciating this is insurance, which means the government pays for it.
Absolutely. You're right. You're right.
And just for context, because this is important, the government of Grenada has paid 24 million US in premiums between 2007 and 2024. 24 million in premiums. It also takes some level of courage to keep doing so, because you to see that between 2007 and 2024, there have been significant climatic events that have plagued this island, from flash flooding, from unpredictable rainfall, from droughts. We can go on and on. Sargassum, and no payouts were received prior.
Right, we're in this multi-hazard era in the region, where it's not just a hurricane, it's multiple things, in fact.
Right. So that I want to point it, but I do want to agree with Anthony that the quick payout is critical.
It's critical.
Because in the immediate aftermath of, and no matter how much you plan, you could never foretell the scale or magnitude of what you would have to respond to. And so in the immediate 14 days, oftentimes that is absolutely critical.
Yes.
To be able to respond, whether it's from simple examples, like in Carrick and Pitimati, providing vehicles, because there's just no vehicles that were available to even just move and do basic stuff. Whether it's to get fuel, whether it's to get all of the relief supplies that you're gonna get. Sometimes we forget that when people walk into the shelters, they literally walk into the shelters with nothing, by the hundreds.
Right.
And if their homes are destroyed, there is no place to go. So you have to feed them, clothe them, deal with all of the sanitation issues that could arise, the security issues that could arise. So we also have to appreciate that oftentimes the service providers, whether it's power or water, these people will be working around the clock.
Right.
And you have to be able to provide the necessary support and so on that you need for them. So what appears perhaps with no context as a lot of money could easily be eaten up in a month or two, just in terms of the relief effort and response that is required to address the issue.
Well, what I hear you saying, Honorable Prime Minister, is that the flexibility it gives you to respond in those first few days is what you value about the CRIF, notwithstanding that you've been paying the premiums for so long, Mr. Solomon. But this is one kind of what I would call financing that is needed in the sphere. Tell me about the bank and your approach to, the disaster or the resilience financing is really the term that I would like.
Okay, thanks. I'm happy that you said resilience financing.
Yes.
Because I need to locate this properly in the context of our strategic framework, which has 5 pillars of resilience, which is consistent with our whole of society approach to development. And so environmental resilience is only one of them. The governor mentioned financial resilience. We have institutional resilience, production resilience.
Okay, so the various spheres of resilience you are suggesting.
And so, but I need to join the CRIF story a little bit, just to say that we are an integral part of the CRIF setup. And so we would have paid the premiums for several of our borrowing member countries after COVID. We have an ongoing arrangement where we have been paying the premium for Haiti in particular, and by a stroke of luck or the stars lining up, every time we have paid the premium for Haiti is just before a significant disaster. And so we have always been lucky to be timing that fairly well where Haiti is concerned. Following COVID, the Global Affairs Canada provided a grant through the Canada CARICOM Climate Adaptation Fund that provided 20 million Canadian dollars on top of which the CDB put another $1.2 million to again assist countries in paying their premiums in 2021, 2022 as well to CRIF. So we are very much a part of the CRIF story. Now, so in terms of the financing, so the Prime Minister broke it up well in terms of relief and recovery. So the instruments we have currently allows us to provide grant financing early to assist in some of the relief effort. Now I can tell you that in the entire financial landscape right now, there isn't anyone out there giving grants for disaster. And so we provide some grants, and I did say that the IDB assisted us in making that assistance a little bit more meaningful. But in terms of the long-term recovery, we don't have emergency response loans. And right now, we're working in conjunction with SEDEMA to ensure that the country disaster work programs are up to speed, which will allow us then to introduce another instrument, which we call the disaster PBO. And what that really is a policy-based intervention which allows us to provide liquidity or balance sheet support to governments in times of disaster. And this is different from a loan, so disbursing on a fast disbursement basis. So these are some of the instruments that we're dealing with right now. Someone spoke earlier about the debt clauses. Right. Again, we have some work ongoing in that regard. We were able to win a challenge from the Rockefeller Foundation, I think. I can't recall. Let me not call the name.
But a major foundation.
Yes. So to assist in start designing that instrument, we are a significant way forward. But I have to tell you though, that apart from ensuring that the waiver, the suspension of payments in times of disaster is something that is badly needed in the region, but as institutions who are offering it need to ensure that they are also protected. The governor mentioned the experience he had with the credit rating agencies. And so we have to have all our partners on board to ensure that these contingent clauses, when they are instituted, that the credit agencies then do not turn around and penalize institutions for implementing them. And so this is part of the reform of the whole global financial architecture that the governor also referenced.
Right. So what I think we are hearing, one of the things that emerges as you listen to all of these stories is there is a resilience in the Caribbean that fights for and innovates in the face of. I think that comes across very, very clearly. But we're also hearing from you that there is still an inadequacy on the global scene in terms of resilience financing. There are various people playing, CRAFE, the government resources, multilaterals, but there is still a gap in the disaster, with the resilience financing sphere, and especially for small islands, which are the most vulnerable, are not the cause in the climate change sense of these things. We have limited time, but I do want to bring in Miss Giovanna. Youth, we're talking about recovery, we're talking about resilience. Let's look on the long-term resilience. I heard the Honorable Prime Minister make up a point about especially education, mobilization. You represent the youth voice, Is there that role there, especially going forward?
The youth sometimes are overlooked. We have bright ideas, and we want to help. We want to work alongside the government for a better future. And if I were to look towards the future, I'd like to see the youth with a level of preparedness that was far better than what we had now.
The youth themselves,
exactly, because post-Beryl, you saw so many youth charge up to Carriacou to offer their assistance, and they did their best, but there was some disorder. And the only way for us to make it better is through education. Having climate science become a mandatory but fun part of primary and secondary school curriculums in the Caribbean, because we need to make the love and wanting to protect your environment something so common that it becomes second nature. And right now we have an opportunity for Grenada to show global leadership. We could create a climate corps where the government could purchase tents, public portable toilets and supplies, take the youth who are more than willing and able to go to the countryside and train them in disaster preparedness and resistance, because the youth want to help.
So you're saying there is this desire on the part of the youth.
It's not just here in Grenada, it's across the Caribbean.
Right.
And this kind of education allows us to help when another disaster comes, because we know another natural disaster will hit the Caribbean. Climate change has brought us to the point where disasters are inevitable. And if we get hit again, the youth will be able to mobilize effectively, taking pressure off of the government for our rebuilding. And we can also help our brothers and sisters across the island by sending our educated youth to help.
Okay, thank you. You know, what I definitely hear you saying, and I think it's resonating, the youth represent a resource. And once we can educate the resource, I noticed you link science and then you said, but in a fun way, you know, as a scientist. But yes, you're saying, get to the education, educate them, and then see them as a resource. Also think you are making a little bit of a pitch as well for opportunities for dialogue, so that, you know, it's not just having them as a resource, but getting that dialogue so that their ideas are captured. We have run out of time, but I do need to ask you. And Honorable Prime Minister, I'm going to pick up on something you said at your UN speech recently. One of the things you said, which I found very interesting, was that you said the Caribbean can be a lesson for the rest of the world. And I think we've heard that in the panels, but that's the last thing that I really want to ask you. When we look back on an Ivan, when we look on what we have gone through coming up to Beryl, when we look on the resilience, the collaboration, the solidarity, if I were to ask you, what is the lesson that you think the Caribbean, for you, is sending to the rest of the world, all of our panelists, what would be that closing lesson, picking up on the words of our Honorable Prime Minister? And then I'll ask each of you, I'll allow him to go first.
So I would, it's the same answer I gave at the UN, and I'm going to repeat it, which is it's lessons in resilience. And that resilience comes from our ability to innovate, and the governor and others have spoken about our fiscal instruments, financial instruments, whether it's debt suspension clauses, whether it's CRIF, that we've been able to deploy to assist us in the resilience process. But the ability to innovate and respond to all of the natural disasters that we've had to deal with. So I actually said the Caribbean is a lab.
Yes, you did.
And I mean that, and I'm saying we are on the front lines of the significant climatic events. And I would make bold to say we could teach the folks in Florida right now how to respond, and how to respond better, faster, more efficiently, notwithstanding that their resources are far greater than us.
Okay.
Because we are dealing with this over and over. So the point I'm making is that we have become experts in resilience when it comes to dealing with climatic events. Look at the number of persons who've died in Carriacou and Petit Martinique compared to the number of persons who've died in Florida.
Innovation, taking away the example that the Caribbean is in resilience, teaching others. Let me go to the end. Mr. Anthony.
Yeah, what I would say is that, you know, we certainly as a people, we do have the ability to find solutions to our own problems.
Right.
I think we need to recognize that, you know, we have people who can contribute. I think that's the first thing. And again, when you look at CRIF, although we would have received support from the development partners and the World Bank. But the other thing is that even with all of this, it would not have worked had there not been the political will. This, for me, is an excellent example of how political will can help find solutions to problems. So it always comes back to that, in my opinion. I mean, I'm from a public sector background. I worked in the Ministry of Finance, and to me, it always goes back to the question of public governance and how well we in the government, whether it be at the political level, ministerial level, or the senior technocratic level, how well we represent the countries and the needs of our people. So I would say that political will is key, but where there is that will, we can find solutions to the problem. And again, I see CRIF as a shining example of this.
So CRIF is itself one of the lessons for the rest of the world. Mr. Solomon?
Yes, thanks. So when I visited Grenada, Carriacou, and Petimani, I think I told one of the journalists that a lot of times when we talk about climate change being an existential threat, we talk about it in a futuristic way.
Right.
But that threat is now.
Yes.
And so I think we just have to come to terms with that reality. And when you see the destruction that was caused on those islands, how could we be thinking that this threat is in the future? It is right now. I think going forward, we need to double down on our partnerships. We do collaborate with a lot of partners to ensure that we're able to deliver in the best way we possibly can. But we also have to ramp up citizen engagement in a way that includes youth, indigenous people, and all the non-government organizations across the region. That is significant if our efforts at climate change and building resilience is really supposed to work.
Okay, thank you. And it's fitting that we have the youth who represent the future giving us the last word.
The people are key. Community is key, and volunteerism is key. Throughout these disasters, one thing that we can show the rest of the world is that we can band together and help one another even when we are at our lowest.
Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, we thank our panel for their wonderful contribution. This has been the Ivan Plus 20 Resilience Dialogues. We thank you for listening and participating. Thank you.
Thank you to all our panelists. And at this point, we have two things left to do. One, today we're announcing the Ivan Plus 20 scholarship winners and the Ivan Plus 20 Small Grants Program. And I will ask Mr. Timothy Antoine, our chairman, to come forward to announce these scholarships. Right after that, we will go straight into our time capsule event in which several persons here will be including items in that capsule. So bear with us, please.
Thank you very much, Master of Ceremonies. Good evening, greetings to everyone in Grenada, across our currency union, and throughout our Caribbean community. CRIF SPC is not merely an insurance company. CRIF has evolved, and today we are a development insurer. That means we do not simply offer insurance policies, financial protection, which we do, but we also help with capacity building. That includes, for example, internships, scholarships, and small grants to support NGOs and community groups. This evening, I'm pleased to announce some scholarship awards. Just before I do that, I just want to give you a quick context for what we do with respect to scholarships. Since 2010, CRIF has provided scholarships totaling now $1.8 million. These scholarships are in 4 postgraduate and undergraduate studies related to disaster risk management, disaster risk financing, meteorology, climate studies, geography, environmental management, and risk management. Each year, we provide up to 6 scholarships for select master's program at Caribbean universities. And for 2024, the year of Ivan, we are awarding 2 additional postgraduate scholarships and 2 additional undergraduate scholarships to Grenada and Cayman Islands, which were the countries most impacted by Hurricane Ivan. Each postgraduate scholarship has a value of $11,000. That's US dollars. That's US dollars. And I thank the CEO for recognizing the EC currency, one of the strongest currencies in the world, when he spoke earlier. But for ease of comparability, we often, when we quote in CRIF, we use US dollars, so everybody knows what we're talking about. So the postgrad scholarships are US 11,000 each. The undergrad scholarships are 8,000 US each, 4,000 for second year, 4,000 for year 3. So now, for 2024, we are pleased to award 10 full or partial scholarships at 4 Caribbean universities: the University of Technology, Jamaica, the University of the Commonwealth Caribbean, the University of the West Indies, and the University of Trinidad and Tobago. And we are also awarding 6 undergraduate scholarships to students at the University of the West Indies. This evening, on behalf of our board and management, I am pleased to announce the award of 3 Ivan Plus 20 scholarships for students from Grenada. First, Ms. Shonda Gibbs, who is pursuing a master's degree, MSc, in Natural Resource and Environmental Management at the University of the West Indies, Cave Hill. Shonda, congratulations to you. Second, Ms. Roxelle Bartholomew, who will continue to read for a degree in a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering at the UWI St. Augustine campus. Roxelle, congratulations to you. And you'll be pleased to know there is a gentleman in this. Mr. Jebis John, who will read for a BSc in Geography at UWI St. Augustine. Jebil, congratulations to you. So let me repeat: Ms. Shonda Gibbs, Ms. Roxelle Bartholomew, and Mr. Jebis John. Congratulations to our scholarship awardees. We're investing in you. Come back and give back. We expect no less from you. Our final announcement is for the small grants. As I said, we do internships, scholarships, and small grants. This year, we've designated a project here in Grenada as an Ivan Plus 20 project. CRIF is pleased to provide a grant of US $22,000 to the Caribbean Association for Youth Development to implement the project called Building Resilience Through Participation, Engaging Youth Farmers to Build Their Capacities to Address Climate Disasters. Quite a mouthful, but this is what it says. Caribbean Association for Youth Development to implement a project called Building Resilience Through Participation, Engaging Youth Farmers to Build Their Capacities to Address Climate Disasters. Unfortunately, Ms. Cassandra Mitchell, Program Manager for this project, is unable to join us physically, but I believe Cassandra is joining us virtually. And Cassandra, congratulations to you and the organization. I just want to let you know that the project focuses on young farmers and will implement the following activities. It will conduct community workshops with rural farmers and young people in Grenada to enhance their understanding of disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation. Education. Mr. Ostialik would be pleased to hear that. 2, it will conduct training on climate-smart agriculture, financial management, cooperatives, disaster risk reduction strategies, and climate insurance. And 3, it will develop a 3-year youth action plan for disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation in Grenada. And we want to wish every success to the team doing that project. And we do want to say to other NGOs and community groups who have ideas, please go on our website, please make your application. We actually find sometimes we are struggling to get applications for our small grants, believe it or not. So I want to encourage those who are hearing us, not just in Grenada, but across our region, wherever CRIF operates, which is across the region, that you can potentially get a small grant to assist you with the efforts at your community, in your community, or in the NGO which you're serving at the grassroots level. So I want you to avail yourself of those opportunities. And with that, I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Timothy. I will now invite Mrs. Sandra Bailey, our Deputy Chairperson, and Ms. Gina Sanguinetti Phillips, consultant with the Technical Assistance Manager and Corporate Communication teams, to come forward to begin our time capsule event, which is a short event which will see a number of persons placing items in the time capsule. The time capsule will be closed tonight based on the protocols and will be transported and housed at the National Museum of Grenada. On Thursday, we'll actually have an event at the museum with children from schools in that area to discuss the time capsule, Ivan Plus 20, disaster risk financing, and to share hundreds of our children's book, which I'm not seeing any. Anybody has any to show me? Disasters. Our children's book, Hazards, Disasters, and Climate Change, which we will share, which really exposes our young children, ages 8 to 12, to these issues and told in a fun and friendly way. So this is an example of our book. So we will be giving to schools in Grenada and to school libraries this week. So please come forward.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are very pleased to be here to do this time capsule event. This is actually the second one we're doing. The first one we did in Jamaica in June, and this one will actually be housed at the Grenada National Museum. So we have invited persons from ministries, departments, development partners, private sector organizations, academia and youth to paint a picture before and during Ivan, the present, which also includes reflections on Beryl, and our hope for the future.
Thank you so much, Gina, and thank you everyone for joining us today as we deposit our items in our time capsule, and we will open them in 2044. So let us begin, Gina.
Okay. Well, I began. Over to you.
Of course, of course. So some of the items that will be included today will describe visions of a resilient Grenada and the Caribbean. The time capsule will also hold prominent pieces of information such as policy or project documents and annual reports that also paint a picture of where we are today and how we got here. This is a second Ivan Plus 20 time capsule, and it will be housed for the next 20 years at the Grenada National Museum. The first Ivan Plus 20 time capsule was established after a resilience dialogue held in June in Jamaica, and it resides at the UWI Museum. We intend to register these Ivan Plus 20 time capsules with the International Time Capsule Society, which estimates there are between 10,000 and 15,000 time capsules worldwide. The time capsule will then be opened in 20 years in 2044, when I'll be 10, when the organizations here and our future leaders, and maybe some of us, will assemble again, open the time capsule, reminisce, and reflect on whether the visions contained herein have been advanced or achieved. It could be interesting to take the time to immerse themselves in the rich history contained in the time capsule.
Thank you. Various persons and organizations here today have been asked to place items in the capsule. Some will place letters that speak to the person that will hold their position in the future. Some organizations will place project documents or policy documents, etc. One of the unique features of our time capsule is that on the envelope, persons will identify who they want to open it in 20 years' time. So it could be their daughter, their niece, their friend, or just, the future Prime Minister of Grenada, for example. So we invite you to come forward as we call your name. Once you come forward, please place your item in the time capsule. And if you wish, you'll be able to say a word or two. But you don't have to, but if you wish to. And please step to the side for a photo next to the time capsule. So those are your instructions for the evening. So the first person, I'm going to invite Elizabeth Emmanuel to place a laptop in the time capsule. So why are we doing that? Because, of course, 20 years from now, jump drives may not be in existence, and some of our items are on jump drives, so we're putting in a computer that can read that jump drive. So that will be the basis or the foundation of the time capsule.
So we'll now invite the Honorable Prime Minister, Honorable Deacon Mitchell, to place the first Ivan Plus 20 item in the time capsule. And as he walks up, I would just like to remind everyone that he has responsibility as Minister for Infrastructure and Physical Development, Public Utilities, Civil Aviation and Transportation. He's also the Minister for National Security, Home Affairs, Public Administration, Information, and of course, Disaster Management.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now we'll invite the Minister of Finance, the Honorable Dennis Cornwall. He has responsibility for financial protection against hazards. Minister Cornwall? Oh yes, on the other side, correct?
I wasn't watching. And then if you can invite,
yes.
But I don't see him though.
Good evening. I have placed a letter in the time capsule, and I would like the Minister of Finance in 2044 to open this. I may be along, but I'm certain that I will not be the one opening this time capsule or the letter in there in 2044. But whoever the Minister of Finance is will do the honor of doing so. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so very much, Minister Cornwall. So I will now invite Dr. Terence Walters, National Disaster Coordinator, National Disaster Management Agency, NADMA, and he will be accompanied by Janelle Cyrus, the youngest person at NADMA. I think she's the receptionist.
Yes.
So please join Dr. Walters.
Thank you very much. Just briefly, we have placed a photo of the staff at the Grenada office, and so we were looking to see who will be around in 2044. And I have placed a letter to my counterpart in 2044. When I entered disaster management, I had a vision that the agency will have its own resilient headquarters. I achieved that. And now I have a vision for the next 20 years. I've placed it here, and in 2044, let's see how much of it we will accomplish. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will now invite some of our panelists. I'll start with the Governor of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank and Chairman of CRIF SPC, Mr. Timothy Antoine, to deposit his item in the time capsule.
I have deposited 3 documents. 1, the macro socioeconomic assessment of Hurricane Ivan. 2, the CRIF media release on the payout after Hurricane Beryl. And 3, a letter addressed to the Minister of Finance, Minister Cornwall. I want to recognize you, PS Mike Sylvester, and the PS Finance. I've also copied that letter to the Prime Minister, the Leader of Opposition, and the Governor of ECCB. And my expectation and hope would be that these holders of these offices will open this document and read what is in there. Finally, to say that in my letter, I have detailed some of the key lessons from Hurricane Ivan, and I've also posed some questions for what I hope will happen over the next 20 years. Where are we now? Where will we be then? Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Mr. Antoine. I now invite Mr. Isaac Solomon, Acting President, Caribbean Development Bank.
Okay, so I've deposited a thought piece on what a digitally enabled, resilient Caribbean should look like in 2044. I will be asking my children, Shani and Sean, to open it, and they'll be given clear instructions to pass it to the president of the bank at that time.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I will now invite Mr. Crispin Deverne, Climate Change and Disaster Risk Management Coordinator, Organization of Eastern Caribbean States Commission.
I must confess I've taken a very different approach. I'm looking at this, at resilience in a broader context, what I want to see for our Eastern Caribbean region. And so this letter is written to whoever will be the chair of the OECS at the time, but it's actually addressed to the chair of the presidency of the Union of Eastern Caribbean States. Because I see deeper integration and a region moving towards resilience, which is facilitated by that greater integration.
Thank you very much. I now invite Mr. Jeremy Collymore, International Advisor and Consultant in Disaster Risk Management and Resilience. Formerly, he was the Executive Director at Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency. He will now deposit his item. And I understand that his letter is to his daughter, Dr. Dolores Corbin, about achieving a resilient Caribbean.
Yes, thank you very much. The intent is to have an insurance. I have it for my daughter and my grandson. They really follow up on my strong belief in the idea of the resilient Caribbean state. And at that time, to initiate a review of how we've done that far, with resources to be provided. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call on our development partners. I'd like to invite Abigail Baca and Joaquin Toro. Okay, one of you, Joaquin.
Good evening. We deposit a few documents there, and the first logo of CRIF, I made it at that time. So it represents, has documents from a partnership, and it shows how far we can get if we all come together. Has the first grant from PHRD, from the Japanese, the whole proposal, and also the first project. Lastly, I want to say that Evander Holyfield had a plan. He beat Mike Tyson twice, no? So just to say that prevention works, preparedness works, and I think in 40 years we will be beating all these hurricanes. Thank you.
Thank you. We had invited Felipe de la Mota to put an item in, but of course he had to catch a flight. But we will put it in on his behalf, and he submitted a letter from the EU ambassador to the Prime Minister of Grenada in 2044. So I'll now go to the members of the CRIF team. Mr. Isaac Anthony, our CEO, please come forward. And Isaac will include a few documents, including the current annual report, just so when we open it in 20 years' time, we'll see how far we've come, as well as many of the Ivan plus 20 documents, the agenda and so on.
Right, so as Gina has indicated, this is actually addressed to the future CEO, CEO of CRIF 20 years from now. I'm not sure if it's going to be called CRIF, but whoever is going to be there, whether it's a male or female, they would be able to see all the great work that we were doing. If you've ever seen a CRIF annual report, it's not the annual, and it's not a normal annual report. It contains a wealth of information about the financials, but a lot of information on our technical assistance program, certainly on our payouts, as well as our stakeholders and so on. So the future CEO in 2044 would definitely get a good glimpse of what CRIF was like at the time and the great work that this organization was doing. And I'm hoping that whoever that person will be able to match or even exceed the work that we've been doing for CRIF SPC. Thank you.
Thank you. I now invite Ms. Jillian Gola, our Chief Operations Officer. And Jillian will include her contribution, the CRIF Children's Booklet that Liz mentioned earlier, and her own sons actually participated in the launch of the booklet in 2021.
Thanks, Gina. So it's addressed to my son, who was 6 years old when he was involved in the publication, but it's really a reminder for children to get involved. They would remember, two of my children, they would remember the book being distributed in both their schools, teaching about disaster preparedness in Trinidad and Tobago, as it was in many other countries in the Caribbean and Central America. But it is significant because it's a reminder that much of the work that we do is about building a more resilient world for our children. Thanks.
Thank you so very much, Jillian. So we'll then move to other government representatives, and I'll now invite Ms. Caroline McQuilkin. She's the Acting Permanent Secretary with responsibility for national security, Home Affairs, Information and Disaster Management.
So I have placed a letter in the time capsule of what my vision is for a resilient Grenada. And I would have selected my little niece. She's 2 years and 8 months old. She loves outside, she loves nature, she wanted to see all the rain when it was falling during Hurricane Beryl and so. So I selected her, and I would have given instructions for her to open the envelope and to deliver it to the Permanent Secretary with responsibility for disaster management in the next 20 years.
Thank you so very much. So I'll now invite Mr. Javan Williams, and I believe he will have with him members from Carrico, yes? He's a permanent secretary with responsibility for Carrico and Petite Martinique Affairs and Local Government.
Okay, good evening, everyone. We have the NADMA coordinator and district officer for NADMA Carrico, so we have placed a picture of the NADMA staff Carrico and a letter that gives a synopsis about what the experience is and what can help build morals and behavior for the next 20 years. So the letter can be opened by anyone, but it's just to guide our citizens for better operations in a disaster environment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'll now invite Mr. Dwight Logan, District Coordinator for Petite Martinique National Disaster Management Agency, Grenada.
Good evening. I have addressed a note to the government of Grenada, and listen me well, the local government council of Carrico and Petite Martinique, which we hope will be in place 20 years from now. The note is pointing these two groups, the government of Grenada and our local government council, of some things that we would like to see in Petite Martinique re-disaster preparedness. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I will now invite the Reverend Dr. Osbert James, Minister and Moderator, the Presbyterian Church of Grenada, to deposit his item.
I was asked to enclose the prayer that I did today, so it's in there. I also have, among the other documents related to our church, a brochure, fundraising brochure, because Ivan had destroyed our church.
Thank you. Now invite members of the private sector and civil society. We'll start with Ms. Samantha Dixon, President of the Grenada Red Cross Society.
In 1955, Hurricane Janet is the reason Grenada Red Cross got started here as a branch of the British Red Cross. In 2004, Hurricane Ivan was my first experience working with the Red Cross. 2024, I am now the first female president, Grenada Red Cross. I have addressed I have addressed the letter to the future president of the Grenada Red Cross 2024. Sorry, 2044.
Thank you. I now invite Ms. Krishlyn Lashington, member of the board of the Grenada National Museum, to come forward. Accompanied by the chairman of the board, it looks like. He said he wasn't coming up. I guess he changed his mind. Dr. Oliver Benoit.
Good afternoon, everyone. I asked Dr. Benoit to join me, even though he nominated me for this. But 20 years ago, I was in Form 5. Ivan came on the second day of Form 5 for me, so that completely changed life. And right now, I am a director on the board for the Grenada National Museum, and we are honored to be part of this initiative. We are in the business of documenting, so it's good that the time capsule will actually be housed at the Grenada National Museum. In the time capsule that we've just placed, we've placed a letter written by our current chairperson, Dr. Benoit, and it really highlights our vision for the museum, a vision that we've started on in our strategic plan that we're now developing. And we are also in a period of transformation at the museum, and we're so excited to be opening this letter, the future directors, and seeing this vision become a reality. Dr. Benoit, any words from you?
Well, thank you, everybody. I'm happy that the museum is playing an important role in this process. One of the things I want to really leave us with is that I'm not sure the extent to which we pay attention to cultural heritage, the loss of cultural heritage during disaster. And really what we are saying in this letter today, the future board is that by the time that period reach, we would have advanced our thinking and preservation of future of the cultural heritage. So that, I believe, is important for us as we move forward on this journey. So thank you, everybody, and I want to say thank you very much for placing this at the museum. I would hope that I will be around when it is open and we could have an exhibition with everything that is inside it. So thank you.
Thank you. I'd now like to invite Mrs. Patifa Lewis-Smith, the Executive Director of the Grenada Chamber of Industry and Commerce.
Good evening. Patifa Lewis just placed an envelope addressed to the Executive Director and the President of the Grenada Chamber of Industry and Commerce, detailing our vision for 2044. I look forward to whoever it is open there that will share it with everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. And we now invite the Honorable Tony Gibbs, the former chairman of the Institution of Structural Engineers, Caribbean Group, to come forward.
I'm here representing three regional and international engineering organizations. The first being the Institution of Structural Engineers Caribbean Regional Group, of which I'm a former chair, and which group gets regular contributions, donations from CRIF to help support our biennial conferences. The next one will be occurring later this month in Trinidad and Tobago. The other organizations I'm representing, the Council of Caribbean Engineering Organizations, of which I was a former Secretary General, and the Institution of Civil Engineers, of which I am the current Ambassador for the Americas. What I placed in the time capsule is a 10-page document, but it includes a 2-page letter, and that 2-page letter lists 4 areas of concern to the engineering community in the Caribbean which have to be addressed if we are to experience future extreme natural hazard events without them causing disasters. And the hope is that when it is opened in 20 years' time by the chair of the Institution of Structural Engineers Caribbean Regional Group, the chair of the Council of Caribbean Engineering Organizations, and the Caribbean representative of the Institution of Civil Engineers, they'll be able to see how well we have done in the next 20 years from now in achieving what is really necessary to be done. And I'm willing to share that letter with anyone in the audience who is interested in finding out what needs to be done to change natural hazard events from disasters to wondrous items of nature. Thank you very much.
Good. Thank you very much. So last but no means least, our youth representatives. So I start with Giovanna Oschilek, co-founder of 195 in 365 Inc., a youth advocate and a member of our panel.
In the time capsule, I placed a letter to myself 20 years from now, because I'll only be 39. It's still quite young, as all you youthful faces here can agree. I also placed a hurricane strap, because I want to see how far we've come in 20 years. And in that letter, I placed my expectations for the future, because our paradise is too precious for us to lose. And in 20 years' time, I hope to see a safer, happier, and a more sustainable future for all life on this planet.
Thank you very much. So I'll now invite Miss Annalyn McPhee. She is a past CRIF scholarship recipient.
So I definitely was not prepared to speak, but peer pressure. So often when we speak of development in small island developing states, it's usually underpinned by so many things, mainly climate resilience being one of them. And call it serendipity, I'm here this week in Grenada discussing national development contributions with many other colleagues from around the Caribbean, and I just thought it fitting to place the agenda from that meeting in the time capsule, hoping that in 20 years, the rhetoric would be changed and we would not be here convincing persons that for our survival as SIDS, we need to decrease the temperature goal to 1.5.
Thank you so very much. And my final youth representative is no other than our spoken word performer, poet, Cindy Celeste.
In the time capsule is a virtual copy, a digital copy, as well as a text-based copy of the piece that I read this evening. And I wanted to especially thank Griff for the inclusion of arts and the oral tradition in a space like this, because our storytellers and our stories are important for driving progress in our region. So thank you so, so much.
Thank you, Cindy. And our final person we're going to invite up, he is probably not one of the youth representatives, but Mr. Leroy Abraham, the CEO of Grand Lake. And as many of you know, they did receive a payout after Beryl this year. Welcome. Do you have space? We'll make it fit. There you go.
Good evening, everyone. So Grenlec is on a trajectory of transformation, and we've decided to include a current kilowatt hour meter because 20 years from now, in 2044, that would be a clear indication of how far the organization has traveled.
Okay, and we now invite the Honorable Prime Minister back up. I understand he has some additional things he'd like to put in the time capsule.
This year is Grenada's 50th anniversary of independence. And I believe the Honorable Prime Minister would let us know what the final thing that's going into the time capsule this evening.
For the museum, you have to make sure that you provide some extra security for the time capsule, because included in it is our 50th anniversary $50 EC note, which is legal tender, which was produced with the kind collaboration of the governor and his team at the East Caribbean Central Bank to mark Grenada's 50th anniversary of independence, which features the father of independence, Eric Matthew Geary, and the Prime Minister who succeeded him, Maurice Bishop, as well as an image of our legendary Kirani James, who is our triple Olympic medalist and who's participated in 4 consecutive Olympics and has been able to do so notwithstanding that he has the affliction of Graves' disease. So Kirani is obviously a testament to the resilience of, in particular, the Grenadian youth. And so we also have our 50th anniversary pin, which was done in commemoration of our 50th anniversary as well, with the 50th anniversary logo and our 50th anniversary magazine. So it's 20 years from now. It wouldn't be quite yet close to Vision 75 because we need, I think, another 25 years. But it will certainly give those who will be tasked with celebrating Grenada's 75th anniversary of independence a 5 years head start as to the type of event that they will have to come up to that we had this year. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for your contributions today. And we invite those of you who live here in Grenada to please visit the I1+20 Time Capsule exhibit at the National Museum. Bring your children, your friends, and colleagues, and please take advantage of everything else that's at the museum as well. In the near future, we will be providing an opportunity for persons to contribute to a virtual time capsule, so stay tuned for that opportunity. Thank you. Over to you, Liz.
Thank you very much. And I know we have gone beyond our time and persons are hungry, so there are going to be cocktails outside, but just give me a moment to say a few things. We brought a lot of goodies for you, you know, bookmarks for your kids and notepads and tips to be prepared for hurricanes, for households, communities, small businesses, earthquake tips, children's booklets. We all needed this today so that we didn't, knock anybody to get the final things going. We have a lot of stress balls. We have the I1+20 cup. So please, don't let us go back with all of these. It was a struggle bringing them. And we don't want to go back with them. But I'm only left to say, and I know this is a part that it can be very, very long. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you to the government of Grenada, the team we worked with. Thank you, PS, for working with us, supporting us. We had weekly meetings, and when our PS when Carolyn could make those meetings, she says, I need to know what's going on. Let's have a meeting. It was great working with the government of Grenada, and we really, really appreciate the support that we were provided with from the beginning to the end once we decided on I1+20 taking place in Grenada. I thank the CRIF board for your vision for I1+20, for what we're doing here. We thank our moderator, our panelists, our open chairpersons. We have more I1+20 dialogues coming up. We will be at the CDM conference in St. Kitts and Nevis. We're hoping to do a time capsule with youth there. We have a resilience dialogue coming up in November on the margins of the CDMA Council of Ministers meeting. And there is something that we have that we want to produce a publication. We want every entity to tell their story. And it's really on I1+20, but looking at how you were impacted as an organization, what you're doing today and what your future is. What are you doing for the future to build resilience, the resilient Caribbean? And every time I explain it, I use the example of the ECCB. I say to people, what happened to your members, Chair, at the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank? How did Ivan impact them? And guess what? It's not 100 pages you're writing. We have word limits, so it's just like a few words. What are you doing now at the central bank to ensure that resilience is built within the macroeconomy of your members? And that, again, is some short words. And then finally, your thrust for a resilient Caribbean through your eyes and through your organization. It was something we wanted to launch this year, but we're afraid to write sometimes. So we're going to leave it for early next year to launch it and to close off I1+20. But we encourage you, if you want to write a piece in it, please join us. If not, you will write a piece in it. If we have not contacted you, contact us. Right? As I continue to say thank yous, I'm asking our panelists, the CRIF board, our Honorable Prime Minister, Honorable Minister of Finance, to join us again on the stage just for some photo ops, please. And thank you again, everyone. Thank you for our open chair panelists who were brave to come up here. Abby. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And please.